Here.
Sorry, Commissioner Patterson
Here.
and Chair Noble.
Here. Thank you. And so for public comments, we have forms, right?
Yes, we do have forms in the back, so if you would like to speak on an item that is on the agenda, please fill out this form in the back and give it to me. And then when the item comes, I will call your name. If you want to speak during a public comment on an item that is not on the agenda, also fill out a form and give it to me as well. Thank you.
So next on the agenda is the approval of minutes, so the minutes from the January 9th, 2020 meeting.
I move that we approve the minutes as written.
I'll second.
So
All in favor?
All in favor, thank you.
Aye.
All in favor. Okay, that passes. So moving on to the next item on the agenda is public comment. So this is an opportunity to speak on an item that is not on the agenda. So anything that's not on the agenda to which you would like to provide a comment to the commission, now is your time to do so. Okay. So if there are no comments for items that are off of the agenda, we're moving on to announcements. This is a time for staff and commission members to provide any announcements, reports, and updates of status.
Okay, I can start. We have a few upcoming events. Friends of Albany Park cleanup on Albany Hill this coming Saturday from 9 to 12. And this will be a cleanup at the top of Albany Hill at the end of Taft Street. There will also be a litter removal, a weeding project, and some history of the hill provided by Margot. We also have upcoming a Bollywood dance party at the community center on Friday, February 28th. It's at 7 p.m. and entry fee is $5 at the door. Also on March 3rd is a blood drive from 9:30 to 3 at the Albany Community Center. And then a few recaps. We had on January 24th, we hosted a Be Curious talk, a science lecture on bees by Pros Commissioner Hilary Sardinas. We also had our Chinese New Year celebration last Thursday. It was very well attended, and as usual, it's one of our most popular events. And then we are continuing our healthy garden talks on backfoot trees, and actually we had one on February 10th, and the next one is on March 22nd, and they're also at the community center.
Are there any announcements from commissioners?
I would just comment that Julie and I went to a recycling and compost and anyway workshop the other night. It was fabulous. We learned a lot. Very valuable. So thank you folks for putting that together.
All right, any other announcements? No. Okay, so moving on to agenda item number 5, presentations. No presentations tonight? Okay, so we move on to discussion and action items. So agenda item 6.1 is a discussion of the work plan amendment request to include the exploration of options to install a basketball court at Memorial Park. And so Commissioner Frank has a update on this item. Isabel, do you want to provide any additional staff information before?
If you want to start, and if
Sure.
there's anything to add, I'm happy to.
Yeah, that's great. So I presented at City Council, and there was actually a pretty interesting discussion, and there's a lot of public comment there. But the motion was to allow us to pursue this work plan under the condition that the school district pay for the hoops and agree to restore them after the portables are removed. I talked with Superintendent Frank Wells, I think the next day, and he said, sure, no problem. But actually, since then, there's even been more movement, which Isabel, you might be able to provide more of an update, but I did talk to Superintendent Wells actually just today. He was ambitiously trying to get them installed even before tonight's meeting. Anyway, so what he told me today was the hoops have been purchased, and they found a space actually right next to the portables with, like, on the high school sort of campus to put those 2 half courts with lines and all of that. So I'm trusting that it's going to happen. He says they're going to be installed tomorrow, so we'll see. But if it doesn't happen, then I'll report back to you next month. But it looks good. It looks really good.
I have the same information.
Okay, great. Thanks. And you have the same day? Do you have the same day?
I do have
Okay,
the same day tomorrow.
Good.
For the weekend. Ready for the weekend.
Great, thank you.
Well, is that area also have lights? Because that was an issue that a lot of people had, was that they wanted to have lights on the court so kids could play later.
Yeah, good question. I don't know, but I know it's right by the tennis courts where there are lights.
Okay.
And I think the old courts were nearby, and they also had lights at night. But that's a really good question. So thank you I'll check that out.
So before we decide how we're going to proceed on this item, are there any members of the public who would like to provide a comment on this agenda item? No. Okay. So,
If you
sorry,
like
if you
to
could go
mic.
to the.
Understood, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so Commissioner Frank, so do you have sort of thoughts on how the commission should proceed on this agenda item in terms of continuing to engage, or what are your thoughts on kind of our next steps on this?
Yeah, my thoughts are that we can wait and see and trust that it's going to happen, like, within the next week. I do think the one thing that's unresolved is getting commitment that the basketball courts will be restored after the portables are gone. So perhaps at a future agenda item, we can talk about that. Once we get an update, we see how the temporary ones look, then we should think about having some kind of formal letter requesting that they get restored once the portables are gone. So that would be my recommendation, but that's something we can discuss as a commission.
Okay, so no need at this time to have a subcommittee to engage on this. We'll just monitor the situation and stay involved.
Yeah, stay kind of watching and making sure it happens. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, all right, does that sound acceptable to everyone?
Should we have a vote?
I don't think we need to have a vote, but just a general agreement that.
Sounds great.
I can't believe it was resolved so easily. So
I really want to commend all of the citizens that came forward with the comment, and I also want to commend Commissioner Frank for going and representing at the city council.
I understand that there are a lot of speakers at the school board meetings as well, which I'm sure played a small role in this happening so quickly.
well done.
Well done.
Great. All right, so with that, we'll move on to agenda item 6.2, which is the Oceanview Park tennis courts and pickleball. So there's been a subcommittee of the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission who have prepared a document with a recommendation for the commission's consideration. So this agenda item tonight is going to be the subcommittee presenting to the commission its report and its recommendation. So I know that there are a lot of members of the public who are here tonight for this agenda item. If you're planning to speak on this agenda item, would you mind raising your hand, please?
Okay. Okay. While the commission deliberates, could you, those of you who have not filled out a form yet, could you please do so and give it to me so that I can call your name when the time comes? Thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll start with this.
So I think the way we want to proceed is that we'll have our subcommittee make a presentation.
In order. You're gonna need to, actually, yes, when the time comes.
So we'll have the subcommittee make a presentation
First, yes.
and then the commission can ask clarifying questions of the subcommittee. I would ask that we hold off on a discussion or an expression of opinions at that point. Then we'll receive public comment. I think we'll hear a lot during the public comment, and then we'll take it back here for a discussion and potential decision. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay, so with that,
Okay, so Commissioner Abbott and I, Commissioner Martin, were the Pickleball Subcommittee, and we benefited from having a lot of public input on this. It's a close race between this and dog parks, I think, for what we've gotten the most input on. And certainly a lot from emails. This has been on the agenda on a few other prior meetings. People have spoken. It's really helped us understand the issues and the needs of the community, and also with pickleball being a sport that's new to many of us. Many of us have experience with tennis. That it was also helpful to have extra meetings with pickleball people months ago and recently to try to understand what that is all about and how that works and what their needs are, because it was new on our radar. So Commissioner Abbott and I met individually, and we met with some pickleball representatives to get some clarifying questions and some details, try to sort out on the needs of that sport that Commissioner Abbott and I had played tennis in the past or currently, and so that was very helpful. And then we met, as we said at the last meeting, we said we would meet with the Public Works, and so we did meet with the head of Public Works there, Mark, what's his last name? Curley, yeah, Hurley. And also Isabel was there as well. And what was his name from?
Bell. He just goes by Bell.
Yes, he does.
And what's his role with the city?
He's the adult sports coordinator.
So he teaches pickleball at the senior center, or with?
Yeah, he does drop-in pickleball for the recreation department and also at the senior center.
Okay. And so we met with them, and so discussed some of the further logistics and details that the city would, need to sort out, and that was very helpful to get the city's perspective, and was also very clarifying for Commissioner Abbott and myself as far as what the role of the commission was versus the role of Public Works versus the role of the city council, and what recommendations we, should and shouldn't make at this stage.
I'd say the meeting was a game changer.
Yeah.
It's a little pun.
Yeah. Yeah, a game.
Saving that one. I had it going all
Some might say that, yes. And so it was a game changer in the sense that we had been thinking that we needed to figure out every detail and then present that as a full package to the city council as this is exactly what we want implemented. And it became clear that what we needed to do instead was make recommendation that was definitive one way or the other on the basic idea, but then ask the city council to devote some time to approve that and devote time to staff to research details further with more opportunities for input and really fine-tuning the actual details of the final plan. So we'll get into it a little bit more here in just a minute. So the first slide on the right shows an overhead satellite image of the court as it exists basically today, with 2 tennis courts and lines painted on there for 4 pickleball courts, 1 on each tennis court and then 2 at the ends. And some are overlapping, and there's if there's one group playing tennis in one court, then you've kind of only got one court for pickleball, and so that's some of the existing situation. At the very top on the left, you see our work plan. It says priority in the priority 1 category. There's several things, of which one is it says convert Oceanview Park tennis courts to pickleball courts. So the subcommittee considered the following recommendations to send to council Number one is do nothing, in which case it would continue looking like the picture on the right. Number two, repaint 2 Oceanview tennis courts for 8 non-permanent pickleball courts. Number three, convert 1 Oceanview tennis court to permanent pickleball. Number 4, convert 2 Oceanview tennis courts to permanent pickleball. And after considering all of those things and all the input we'd had, which was super helpful from the community, emails and people speaking in person and other meetings that we'd had, including these most recent meetings, the subcommittee decided to recommend converting 1 or 2 courts, and that would be that we would be voting on, one of those things, but the recommendation would be 1 or 2 courts. If you go to the next slide. So some designs were presented to us as some concepts, and these are some of those. So this is the first option so these are all the very first picture we saw on the previous slide was the do nothing slide, and then here's the the next option is repaint 2 Oceanview tennis courts for 8 non-permanent pickleball courts. There's a lot of different pros and cons, but the pros include tennis players being minimally impacted, and pickleballers could do 8-court tournament, so that was something that people had said tournaments were something that were important as part of something to do for pickleball. Cons included likely underutilized compared to permanent courts in the Bay Area, and the only one in our area that we're aware of is Berkeley has 1 tennis court that was converted to pickleball, a tennis court that wasn't being used at the time, and it's got 4 permanent pickleball courts, and what we hear is from Bell and others that it's being used a lot, and that people that have to set up their nets and do other things like that aren't using ours, or El Cerrito's is also a non-permanent one. I know the report that Commissioner Abbott had written said it was permanent in El Cerrito, but apparently it's not. And so likely underutilized, and that I had worked on that as well. Likely underutilized compared to permanent courts in Bay Area, and also having it be like it is now or like this means that kids, youth, beginners, anyone out without the combination to the lockbox would be shut out. So pickleball would pretty much only be a sport for adults, seniors, and kids could participate if adults were there and could help set it up and then put it away in a responsible way. Okay, so that's what was one that we considered, and this is one of the first recommendations that we have, and that would be to convert 1 tennis court into permanent pickleball. The pros is that it preserves 1 tennis court. Pickleballers could do tournaments. You'd have the permanent pickleball courts plus, which could always be used for drop-in, and then the painted ones could be set up if people wanted to do a lot more groups for tournaments. It's Friendship Club, which is right there a few feet away, and aftercare for children could offer pickleball just by having paddles and balls handy. There's still many tennis courts in the region. Underserved residents west of San Pablo, like myself, as someone who lives west of San Pablo, would have easy access to permanent tennis and pickleball courts, easy walk away. People of all ages, including kids, youth, beginners, can just show up and play whenever they want. Kids from University Village or any of the surrounding areas could just walk over there and play with set nets that are permanently set up. The cons are that removes 1 tennis court from the main con, it removes 1 tennis court from Albany and the region. Maybe I'll mention briefly that in some of our discussion with Public Works, if you're looking at the court on the bottom right-hand corner, that's a dashed line for the pickleball court. It was communicated to us that the city would probably need to consider ADA as sort of accessibility, people who are people in wheelchairs that could play or something like that. something that's not set up in Berkeley and most other facilities, but that by having 3 permanent and 1 pop-up court there on the right could potentially allow for ADA, Americans with Disabilities, access. And that's one of the things that would need to be worked out in more detail, that we're not going to figure that out, all the details of that right now, but something that Public Works would look closer at on a later iteration of this. Next slide. The other option that we recommended, remember the recommendation was to convert 1 or 2 pickleball courts from the subcommittee, was to convert both tennis courts. The pros are that pickleballers could do tournaments just by showing up. Friendship Club can offer pickleball, still many tennis courts in the region, maximum pickleball possibilities. Cons are that it of course removes 2 tennis courts from Albany and the region. And the next slide, and that's just a repeat of the first slide. So those are the 4 things that we're proposing the commission consider. The do-nothing option is the picture on the right, and we're recommending list items 3 and 4 there for the commission to consider. And Commissioner Abbott, what else would you add to that?
You actually covered pretty much what I was going to say.
Okay.
Maybe I would draw a little more detail on the issues that came up in our meeting with the city and the research that Mark Crowley had done. One thing that's interesting, if you could go back to one of the slides that shows the permanent pickleball courts. Actually, one of the ones, maybe the one that's overlaid on a tennis court. You notice how the pickleball with that's overlaid on the tennis court, how it's further back and further over to the side. What Mark discovered when he went to survey the courts was that the surface in that area around that is marginal. Particularly in the corners, it slopes down generally, and so there'll be dirt. I wish I had a laser pointer, but down, say the lower left corner is almost always dirty, if it's often wet and slippery. And for tennis, that's fine, but it actually is in the, catches the corner of the field of play for pickleball, and that's an issue. Tennis, it's far enough away that it's not such an issue.
And we have heard from some pickleball players that they're used to taking up more of the surface than tennis players, and so they're also used to sweeping away debris and dealing with the edges. So that may or may not be, but that was something that Public Works was concerned about, and that would need to be fleshed out as to whether or not the surface would need to be resurfaced, and that's something that...
Additionally, we noticed just when we went that along the edges, again, for tennis, it's not an issue because it's out of the way, but for pickleball, it's in the field of play. There's marginal surfaces on the sides. There's cracks and dips and things like that. And the light posts could potentially present a hazard. Lighting is an interesting issue because the lights really aren't adequate for anybody right now. So do we remove them? Do we move them? Do we replace them? That's one of these issues that we want to look in. Obviously, people are getting a lot more use out of it if they can use it after dark. Everybody, tennis or pickleball. So would that be that's something that the city would want to look at with more research. Mentioned the accessibility. The one point I just made about accessibility, pickleball is apparently quite popular with people in wheelchairs, and it's growing in popularity all over. And really the only difference for the court is there's more area on the sides. That's why there's one temporary court there in this drawing so that it allows enough area on the sides for a standard accessible pickleball court. There's just enough in the back on the ends, but that's just kind of our guess. I mean, it would need to be surveyed and investigated.
Yeah, Mark had done some preliminary research on that and said there definitely needs to be more room around a court if it's going to be ADA accessible. And like I said, there are courts that have been recently constructed that have 0 ADA accessible courts. So that's something that the Public Works wanted to look more into.
And then also, one of his first things he mentioned when we sat down was talking about the use of tournaments, and he went and he said, he looked around and he's not entirely sure that, this whole facility, the 2 bathrooms and the parking could support a tournament. This is something he'd need to look into more. We asked Bell how many people come to a tournament. Bell said, well, he couldn't really, tell us. So we don't really know, but that's something that would need to be looked into. Just as far as the argument regarding tournament, not a lot pivots on that, but that's one issue that they wanted to look into.
Also, that reminds me that Bell had said there's at least one place that has pickleball tournaments with 6 courts, I think it was, in the South Bay.
In Concord, I think he said, Walnut Creek, Concord.
Or I thought it was Hayward or something, but some university. And there's other ones that have 8. And yeah, so that was it's kind of a number to keep in mind, those kind of numbers.
So basically, I think that the recommendation or our option here comes down to, we could just, if we wanted to, we could just say we want to keep it the way it is and we're done. We just say keep it the way it is. That's one option. One is to move the recommendation as presented forward, that we say, okay, let's go ahead and say we think pickleball is important. We're going to commit to converting 1 or 2 courts to pickleball. But how the specifics are going to work out is really going to depend on, cost and Mark looking at it and evaluation of the situation. And we're not really ready to make that sort of recommendation yet. Another one would be, and the issue here is that we sat with city staff, and what they told us was, we can't spend any more time on this until city council says it's okay to do that. So we can't get the information we need to make a solid decision until city council has had a chance, or has said okay, and they can actually devote some real time on it. This is just like, Mark had an hour or 2 that who put into this. So the motion is kind of just to move forward, take the next necessary step, and then that process can continue. And that actually would be another option for us here today, is just say, we're not ready to make a recommendation about converting pickleball, but we recognize more effort needs to be put into finding some facts before we make that call. So that would be kind of a middle proposal.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that one.
Fortunately, I'm presenting now.
Yes,
okay. I could make a motion if
Go for it.
Yeah. So that would be an option 2. So I see basically 3 options. Just say we're done, say move it to council as a proposal, or kind of step back and say let's put some more resources into finding out more about it. And I think that you covered a lot, so I appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Any clarifying?
I had one more point to make. We received some comments about why we didn't meet with tennis players, and I would say that we met with pickleball players once, the subcommittee, to answer a very specific question. And the question was, and I actually posed this in the meeting, we hear a lot of people very enthusiastic about pickleball. They played a lot, they enjoyed here, and that's all been on these courts. So why do we need to change it? So what is the advantage of permanent pickleball courts? And so that was the question we asked. And the answer came back, basically we got a very direct answer and a kind of an indirect answer. One was that the permanent courts, and Commissioner Martin has just mentioned both of these. Permanent courts allow casual play. Kids from Kids Club, they just need a racket and a ball, they can just walk up. It allows discovery. People say, oh, what's that? They're interested in it. So it just kind of opens up casual play. The indirect answer was the observation that while the Albany courts had been very busy, as soon as the Cedar Rose permanent courts opened up, things dried up a lot at Albany. Not entirely, but a lot, suggesting that just the quality of play is so much better at these permanent courts that people are opting to go there rather than kind of the compromised courts that there are at in Albany. So anyway, those are the kind of the 2 answers we got from that meeting. And we were, thinking of meeting with tennis, and then we had this meeting with staff, which just kind of changed the whole equation. So we just moved on with that. And with that, I'm done.
Any clarifying questions?
I have a question about the comment in the report around not being able to just paint, but needing to resurface. I watched the process in Berkeley as I walk by that section all the time of them resurfacing and making those courts. So I understood that to be a general part of the process usually when people put these together. We had heard a kind of rough ballpark estimate of, I thought, around $40,000 or something like that for the cost of the courts originally when Shelley was still here. I'm not sure how reliable those numbers were or what they were based in, but my question was that not including resurfacing? Because I just generally assumed that that included the resurfacing and the painting that we saw in Berkeley.
Mark was reticent to provide numbers, but that does not sound like it includes resurfacing. I mean, when they changed the lights to LED in Memorial Park, it was like $50,000, I think, a court or something.
I don't know about
It
that,
was
but
very
yeah, it was-
expensive. So I think resurfacing a tennis court is not a small thing. Now, I'm sure there's ways to resurface, and, you know, there are different levels, but I'm guessing that wouldn't include that.
It just might be interesting to look and see if there's data from Berkeley about what the cost of that project was, since it's one court. It was resurfaced and then repainted, and new nets had to be, you know, the old net holes had to be covered as a part of the resurfacing. So that data is probably available.
That's what we want to enable staff to.
Yeah, so rather than us trying to decide what's exactly going to happen with the lights, what's exactly going to happen with the surface, we realized after talking to Public Works, the city, that that the best, our recommendation was to just recommend do nothing, convert one, convert two. Basically, our recommendation was to convert one or two, and then let the Public Works come back with a plan and an assessment and a dollar figure.
Yeah, I have a question. I have a question specific. One of my main questions was sort of the need for tournament play, which would require, which I don't even know if would require the two courts. But can we go back to the pros and cons of the one court versus two court? To me, I didn't see a big difference in the cons, or the pros. So, for example, here, the pros for converting one Oceanview tennis court and then having the painted still allows for tournaments, still has, you know, pick-up play. I'm curious what the big difference is. I'm curious what the difference is between the pros, between the one and the two, if you guys could explain that.
Well, I would say here you'd have 3 permanent pickleball courts, and a lot of, it seems like a lot of what's being put in are 4 permanent pickleball courts, so this would be on the smaller side of permanent pickleball courts. Certainly for a tournament, who's ever organizing, you know, that wouldn't be just like a show up and do it kind of thing. That would be someone that would make sure there were nets available in the lockbox and knew the combination and could set up the other courts on the left, for example. So that would provide that flexibility. I didn't see a huge amount of difference there, except that between the two possibilities, except that you could just get that many more casual pickleball players and playing at the same time. If they were both converted, maybe people in the audience will have other ideas for us about pros and cons between converting 1 and 2.
And can you go to the next slide? I just want to see. Okay. I mean, I would only say for the cons, just to clarify that I think it's not just cons of removing 2 tennis courts from Albany, but it's removing all tennis from that area. I just want to make that, you know, I just think there's a distinction there between just 2 tennis courts net versus 2, tennis from that specific Oceanview Park, which I think there's a difference there. But so the pros here could do tournaments basically without setup. Is that right? That's the main difference.
And more people could easily show up
And
and play.
more people could play on casual. Okay, thank you.
Any other clarifying questions?
I just had a question for Isabel, actually. I think, is this the type of thing that, you know, if we were to make some sort of recommendation that Measure R funds would be able to cover some portion of, or I'm just trying to understand what
The
this.
funding piece would have to be assessed at the time, yes, separately.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question about the engagement, because we've seen so many emails come through, and I think some more recent emails have been about local versus folks from out of town. So I'm wondering if you looked into that at all. I think that was a question that we had.
That isn't something we looked into. That's a good question. That isn't something we looked into. I don't have any information on that.
We do have Bell, who's local and trains people locally on our own courts, and I don't know how many of those people are local, but yeah.
Maybe it's a good question during public comment to ask people to sort of just name their residence, so putting that
I
request.
think maybe it's optional if people want to say where they live, so.
Sure.
Well, and
Because I asked that at a past meeting.
Yeah,
I would say early on, when we first met as a subcommittee, we were talking about collecting data, and we realized the challenge of trying to actually collect reliable data, particularly on the tennis players, because it's primarily casual use, rather than the pickleballers who all, kind of get together, made it difficult, challenging to get any data we could have any confidence in. So that's kind of where we
Yeah, and as far as the data goes, also, some of the emails said, I want to keep it tennis, and why don't the pickleball players reserve the courts more often like we do? And what we've heard is actually tennis players rarely reserve the courts, and they can often just show up and play because there's availability or that it costs money and it's a hassle to reserve. So what we've heard from a lot of other people is that there's just not much reserving going on at all, and from the city we've heard that. And so that would be one place where we could get a lot of data if there was a lot of data, but there isn't a lot of data.
Yeah, I just want to make clear that why I'm asking that question is that was a really big question for this Section B dog park, and so that's why we actually asked for zip codes. And, in that case, actually, people lived like right around the dog park, but still people were really concerned about Albany versus other areas. So I think that's just something we might want to consider in this situation too.
so if it's all right with the commission, I think we'll move on to public comment. There are a lot of members of the public who have come here tonight to express their opinions and provide comments on this issue. So if you wish to speak on this item, please submit to Isabel a speaker card, and she will call your name when it is your turn to speak. And Isabel, would you like maybe some people to line up in a...
Yes, if I'm going to call you 3 at a time, and if you could line up against the screen there, and that will speed up the process. They're in the back. Okay.
So before we get you lined up, so as you know, this is a public meeting, so 3 minutes, you're limited to your time, so everybody has an opportunity to speak tonight. And I think that the commission would encourage you to identify whether or not you're an Albany resident. It's not required, but this is, I think, important information on this particular item. So if you wish to do so, we would greatly appreciate it, though it is optional. So with that, do you want to bring our first 3?
Yes, so I have Amy Guillard, or Guir, Isa, and Kathy Taruskin. Okay, so you can go.
Hello, good evening. Thanks for the commissioners for doing such great research. I just wanted to express my support. I'm an Albany resident, and I have been for 20 years. And so I'm here to express support for the pickleball courts. I don't necessarily think we need to convert 2 if it's, has such a great impact on the tennis players. But obviously, it benefits the community that I belong to. And I've been playing for about a year, but I played tennis all my life, but just got into playing pickleball, and it's a great community of people. And I just wanted to hit on a couple of points that Brian mentioned, that the permanent courts allowing kids and families to play, even though they're not like in the loop and know the code. I think that's really a great benefit, and that it's like, obviously it's a big community kind of sport that's not just about the sport. There's a lot of social pieces to it, which I've really enjoyed. And I wanted to mention that when I have played, over at the Cedar Rose Park. I played with some Albany High students that were my kids' friends, and I thought it was really neat that they were playing with all of us older folks, and they were having a great time. And then I also met some KALB students who played tennis, and they were really athletic and great athletes, but still enjoyed the sport. So it's a lot of fun, and it's very accessible to people who aren't super athletic. It's really easy to learn. So that's a big positive thing that I wanted to point out. The other thing is about the permanent courts being a pro. That is true, that I used to play down there. I live on Key Route, and now I ride over to the Berkeley courts because they're just nicer. And I think that's too bad that it's taking away from my own community. Also, I wanted to say that this community has raised a lot of funds for the lighting at the Oceanview courts, and there's a lot of commitment there to really bringing people together. So I think that in trying to look at how you're going to fund this, there's probably more that could be done from our community. I also wanted to mention that obviously we don't want to take both courts, but there are 2 other locations in Albany where you can play tennis. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kathy Teruskin. I'm the local USAPA Pickleball Association ambassador, and I live in El Cerrito. I'd like to focus my comments on correcting some of the misconceptions and misstatements that were included in the Albany Tennis Court Preservation Committee document, which was included in the agenda. The first statement was, we understand that an out-of-town organization, the East Bay Pickleball Alliance, has been lobbying the city of Albany to pursue this project. It's the Bay Area Pickleball Alliance. It was named by Bell, who's an Albany adult sports coordinator for Albany Rec. There was a meetup group that started in 2015, and its home city, it's by the same name, and its home city is Albany. And that group has 87 members who specify Albany as their hometown. More importantly, the majority of the pickleball players in the area are not members of this group, and many, many have never heard of it. Pickleball players are a loosely organized bunch, and we use Google Groups and Bell's mailing list and other various mailing lists to get the word around. Next statement, no one has conducted a thorough study of the number of Albany residents who play tennis on the courts compared to the number who play pickleball. This is true. Instead, each organization has made its own attempts recently to start gathering statistics on Albany residency. In the tennis document, Attachment A listed 25 residents on the petition opposed to the court conversion, and their separate Google Doc has another, I think another 6 additional Albany residents. These numbers I just gathered recently, so I haven't double-checked them. Our pickleball list includes 36 names of Albany residents, plus the 87 in the meetup group, totaling 123. My point is not, who's got 3 more than who else, but some of the statements that there are 10 times more tennis players in the area than pickleball are simply unprovable, I think. Like tennis, we're still gathering numbers. Like tennis, our lists are also increasing on a regular basis, but not just because more players are finding out about the Oceanview conversion effort, but because new pickleball players are coming on board every day. Since January 1, 10 Albany residents have joined the meetup group. The next statement, Attachment C, is an analysis of which pickleball players' supporters are actually Albany residents. This is really a complete misstatement. Attachment C only listed 74 pickleball players. In fact, your commission has received 156 emails from pickleball players since September. And in our letters, we didn't specifically say, I live in Albany, I don't live in Albany, and I think these statistics from the group implied that that if you didn't specify Albany, you lived outside of that area. Can I go for one more minute? Okay. Since September, I've kept spreadsheets of who wrote letters for and against the court conversion, including the tennis petition signatories. Many of the same tennis players have written multiple times, and these are not double counted. So here are the totals. The commission heard from 184 people. 144 were pickleball players versus 40 tennis. In other words, 78% of the respondents have been in favor of the conversion. There are multiple statements in the document that there are hundreds of tennis players residing in Albany, but this may not be true based on the numbers that we're gathering. Quite a few tennis players have told us they support the conversion and think it's only fair for pickleball players to have better facilities. Many tennis players are destined to play pickleball as they get older. I'd like to quote a letter from one of the tennis players. "In another 20 years, I'll probably be playing pickleball, so until then, please keep both lines on the surface of the courts." Fortunately, we know that this shocking attitude is not typical of the entire Albany tennis community. To counterbalance, here's one quote from another Albany tennis player. "I'm a big tennis player, and there's plenty of access to courts in the East Bay. Pickleball is much more inclusive, social, and space-efficient sport. We should absolutely invest in more courts."
Okay, if you could, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Issa Cohen, Albany resident and member of the local tennis community. I'm strongly opposed to removing the right or access of tennis players to use the space at Oceanview. I play tennis in Albany at both Oceanview and Memorial Park at the high school. The term that's being used by the pickleball community is dedicated pickleball courts. However, this term, I believe, is misleading, and a more accurate description of what is being proposed is exclusive pickleball courts. This discussion is really about excluding the tennis community from the tennis courts for the purpose of making them used exclusively for pickleball, rather than being the current situation, which is a multi-use space for both pickleball and tennis. Albany already has the least number of tennis courts per person in the area. There are 8 tennis courts in Albany, and if you take some time to look into tennis use and play in the area, you'll find that there are 348 Albany residents who are members of the United States Tennis Association, including 62 juniors under the age of 18 and 286 people over the age of 18. These are just people who pay money to join the USTA, and the number of people who play tennis in the area are much higher. There are not enough tennis courts in Albany to serve the large number of people that play tennis, and this is especially true for lighted courts. This has not been raised as a major issue, but we're not just talking about 2 tennis courts. We're talking about 2 lighted courts, which is a huge and very valuable asset of the community. There are 8 lighted tennis courts in the air in El Cerrito and Albany. El Cerrito has more tennis players in the USTA than Albany does. If you remove these lighted courts, it's not just removing tennis courts, but it's removing the ability for people to play tennis at night. And if you look at one of the pickleball letters, you'll see that as in the recommendation by the commission, the pickleball community said whether the lights are fixed or not, it doesn't even really matter to them. For us, it really matters. And if you go to Memorial Park and try to play tennis at night, or Cerrito Vista, for the 7 months of the year when it gets dark after 6 p.m., you'll see that there are often people waiting for tennis courts. Let me stop there and just make a couple of points. If you really look into this, and I encourage you to talk with the tennis community, I think it's great that you talk with the pickleball community and the public works. I think the tennis community has a lot to say. What you'll find is that there are a lot of Albany tennis players. Could I have a couple more seconds, not a full minute? I will make it very, very quick. And there'll be a lot of very unhappy people if you remove the tennis courts. Tennis can only be played on tennis courts. Pickleball can be played anywhere. You can play it in the gym. You can play it on a tennis court. You can play it on a basketball court. You can have sanctioned tournaments anywhere. I looked into this. There's no rules about how many courts you need to have a tournament. There's no rules about how much space you have to have between courts. So you can have a sanctioned tournament at the courts that are there now. You may have to have a certain number of players who can play in it, whatever it is, but you can have that and the space can be used for everyone. Kids can go and use the courts now. You don't have to have dedicated pickleball courts for kids to go. You can use the tennis net. You can lower the net of a tennis net, use the pickleball lines that are already there, and have a pickleball tournament with that setup so that both people can use it. I know I'm over my time there, so I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
And if we could also hold all applause, thank you.
And also maybe internal comments so that it's easier to hear the speaker. Thank you.
So next, Diova Bernard, Alan Crowley, and Teo Miller.
Yeah, so I established a dangerous precedent by allowing the several speakers to exceed. So we've had two from opposing viewpoints. So I think moving forward, we'll keep the comments to 3 minutes out of respect to everybody who's here tonight. So I will ask you to conclude your remarks when you reach the 3-minute mark.
Hi, I'm Deborah Bernhardt, and I'm an Albany resident. And thank you for allowing me to speak. Here are some points I won't have. Let's see. I'd like to set the record straight on 4 statements that were included in the Albany Tennis Preservation Committee document, which was included in today's agenda. Statement 1, quote, "Not even the primary organizers for this proposal are from Albany. I am of the primary organizers, and I have lived in Albany for 21 years. Statement 2, quote, "Albany could allow the Pickleball Association to locate a locked construction box to store portable nets. Albany granted pickleball players permission to have this locked box, and it has been in place behind the tennis backboard for almost a year. The fact that the tennis group isn't even aware of it illustrates the problem. No casual players can just show up and set up pickleball nets," and there's further information about that, but we already know that. So statement 3, quote, "It appears that both groups have submitted anecdotal information about how frequently the Oceanview courts are used." Quote, "The pickleball data is not anecdotal. We took detailed attendance at 4 Oceanview sessions per week for 6 months in preparation for making a case to the city that we needed better facilities. Within that period, people showed up to play pickleball 2,151 times." Statement 4, "Multifunction use is a critical way to share resources in a small town like Albany." Using that argument, wouldn't it be more fair to paint pickleball lines on all of Albany's tennis courts? All of them. Let's just paint lines on all of them. Why should tennis players have dedicated courts for tennis at Memorial and Terrace Park, preventing pickleball players from being able to use these facilities? Our argument is that it is better to share resources citywide rather than location-wide. Converting one location to be dedicated to pickleball and leaving the other locations in this 1 square mile town dedicated to tennis would provide a better playing experience for each sport. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Alan Crowley. I live in Albany too, just up the street. I play tennis, and I've been for many years, and I play on all the courts, the Oceanview courts, the Terrace courts, the Memorial courts, and I have 2 sons that play and a wife that plays as well. You know, I think that the Google Doc has been updated, and the Google Doc that's gone around now has 91 names on it of people, or is it 71 names, of people who have seen this letter that we wrote and specifically oppose this project. And so, you know, I think the numbers definitely are anecdotal, but the numbers they gave you earlier about people in meetup groups doesn't mean that they've heard all the arguments and support this situation. There's obviously a difference between people in meetup groups or people who show up for events who wish conversion of public courts versus people who have signed a petition with the specific arguments in it. I do think there is a lack of evidence to have before you regarding the numbers, but at least here we have a lot of people in this audience, a lot in favor in pickleball, a lot in favor in tennis, but behind us we have hundreds as well. We haven't specifically focused for 6 months like the pickleball community has to gather numbers, but that can be done. So we submitted this letter, which had a couple arguments, and I think it's not a matter of just eliminating 2 courts. It's 1/8 of, there's only 8 courts in Albany, so it's eliminating 1/4 of Albany's courts or 1/8 of Albany's courts. In the neighboring cities, which is outlined in this letter, and I'm not going to repeat everything in the letter, which was put together rather quickly, but there is a lot of usage in Albany, and I think Issa cited some statistics that he gathered from the United States Tennis Association. We can gather more, but you see the numbers of people that are registered USTA players, and registered USTA players are usually a little more serious than casual players. So there's going to be probably hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and I don't appreciate the snickers. So anyway, I think we're all very serious about this. We appreciate your work on this. And I think it's very problematic when this commission comes in without any data about the numbers and the costs. And it seems like it's still a very, very, very premature proposal. I'm sure you did some work on it, but it didn't sound like a lot. And I urge you to reach out more, get more information. We will be providing more information about this. Given that there is now those other courts in Berkeley, this may very much have satisfied the need of the Albany community. Maybe it hasn't, but at the same time, Albany is a much smaller city and doesn't have the capacity of a big city like Berkeley or a big city like El Cerrito to convert courts that have been used and that have been used in a shared capacity for a long time. So thank you very much, and we appreciate your attention to this project.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Teo. I've been living in Albany for roughly 10 years, and so I've been playing tennis for the past 3 years of my life, and it's greatly influenced that time. And I think there could be, I think this whole thing, both sides have some pretty good arguments, but I think that there might be bigger, fish to fry. I think we could maybe use some traffic calming things or some bike lanes instead of using this money for changing the courts. That's all I really wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Darlene Vandenya, Jean Wong, and Morgan Shepherd.
Hi, thank you for allowing us to speak. My name is Darlene Vandenya, and I am also a USAPA ambassador for Oakland. Granted, I live in Oakland. However, I work at the Y, and I teach pickleball at the Y in a small gym where we don't have very much space. I've been teaching this class this year since January, the 3rd session I've done. And since January, 50 people, I've taught 50 more people to play. And I would venture to say that about 30% of them live in Albany.
Which Y?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, which Y?
I'm sorry, the downtown Berkeley Y, which is affiliated with the Albany Y. So I've taught 50 people to play since January alone. In the last 3 years, I've taught 250 people to play. If you talk about serious play, the USAPA, the United States Pickleball Association, has thousands and thousands of members. In the last few years, pickleball, the membership in pickleball has grown at about, what is it, Kathy, about 20% in the last 3 years. And it continues to grow because it's a sport for all ages. And the argument that you fellows raised about permanent courts, that's what's needed. I say one, is that already?
No.
I say taking one of the two and making it permanent makes sense, because to set up nets, to know the combination, and then set up the net, it takes know-how, so no one can just walk up and play as they can on tennis courts. The courts at Cedar Rose, which are accessible by that bike lane, Every day, people ride by, they see people playing, and they want to know, what is this sport? How can I play? And there's someone who can hand them a paddle, and within 20 minutes, they know how to play, and within 6 months, they brought their whole family. That's not anecdotal. I've witnessed it. So I think that there's tennis courts everywhere, and there are serious pickleball players, just as serious as tennis and just as competitive. Oh, and the thing about tournaments, the advantage to a tournament is it brings people not only from Albany, but from surrounding areas. And those people who play in those tournaments, they then want to go out to eat, and they want to go out to drink. So I know that it would bring in extra business. We have one tennis court in Oakland that has pickleball lines on it, 4 courts. On a freezing cold Tuesday evening, we have 30 people who want to play on those 4 courts. So there are just as many people waiting to play as there are people playing, and I'm talking a freezing cold, dark Tuesday night. We did have a tournament there last year. We had 32 people come and play. We taped 4 courts, and then we had the 4 courts that had the painted lines. We set up 8 nets, 32 people played, and after that, they all went out to eat in Oakland. So.
Hello, my name is Jean Wang, and I live in El Cerrito. I just want to voice my personal experience and my support for pickleball courts. I played tennis for probably 30 years to now, and I've been playing pickleball for about 2 years. And all through the years of playing tennis, the Oceanview courts were never busy. Nobody ever played there, or very little. And so I think it makes sense to convert those courts and improve them, whether it's going to be 1 tennis court and 4 pickleball or whatever, but at least part of it should be pickleball. And also, pickleball is played by all ages, not just seniors, as some people think. If you come to Cedar Rose, you see that there are kids playing with their families, very frequent. And there are like high school kids, college kids that we play against, and they love it. And there are more and more of these youngsters playing. So, and also space usage. 1 tennis court, you could have 2 people playing, or at most 4, for about an hour. But you can convert 1 tennis court into 4 pickleball courts, and that is 16 people playing. Same amount of space. So it makes sense, and a lot more usage. And let's see. I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Hello. My name's Morgan Shepard. I lived in Albany for 8 years. I moved to El Cerrito recently. I'm an avid tennis player and tennis coach. Worked for the USTA and was a college coach, and have been tennis for a long time, and in this area for a long time. I have a few comments about it. One is that I feel like the tennis community hasn't been consulted, and I think it would be really helpful. And I think we may find something that could work out for both. One question I have, and I don't know anything about how this all works, but I don't know why they can't put a net that can be converted for pickleball or tennis across the middle, and then have 4 pickleball courts that are permanent and 2 tennis courts without losing all the other ones. You wouldn't have the 8, but you could have permanent. And this is just off the top of my head. I have no idea why that wouldn't work. But the point is, I don't think there's been talk of like, how do you optimize this for all the people, rather than this competitive, like it's this way or it's that way. Like, pickleball's awesome, and I've played it. I love it, and these people want it, and it's great. But those tennis courts are incredibly valuable. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars that would cost to make that court now, and they're lit. If you take out the lit courts, right, you're going to already. Like, we have a group that plays at Memorial that's played there for, 7 years, and there's 20 guys that rotate in, people that rotate in and play. And we can't play at Memorial anymore. They won't allow us to do it there. I coach them, so we can't do it there. If you don't have 2 courts, we've gone over to Oceanview. Part of the reason that Oceanview is underutilized, and I think it would be utilized a lot more, and it's still utilized, is that the lights almost, since I've been here, which is 8 years, more than half the time, it seems like, I don't know the numbers, but they haven't worked, right? The lights go out, there's one light out, they should be converted to LED, which is much more energy efficient and works much better, right? And it would be much more inviting for the park for people to come and play. And people think, well, if they don't work, then why are we going to come and play, right? And the court surface isn't that well taken care of. You know, it's getting older, so people don't come. It doesn't look inviting as much as they would. And it's still very much needed right now as it is, right? So I just think there's a way to make this work. But the memorial courts will be incredibly impacted at night. If there's no light courts here, as well as the other surrounding courts, there's not very many. So I just, please consult the people, all the people, and come up with something that really is going to work and not make a bunch of people really, really upset. Thank you.
Okay, Damon Levy, Sarah Shallcross, and Angela Del Priori.
Is there a second to set this up? I don't know exactly what I should be doing with the presentation.
Can you put the flash drive on in the computer?
Those handouts for the commissioners.
These are printouts of the same thing. I don't think we'll get all of it. Okay, so I'm going to go as quickly as I can. I want to emphasize that my position is not against pickleball. I think pickleball is great. I've never played it, but I think it's great that there's a sport that people who are getting older can play. And
Okay, guys.
Just oh, shh. Okay, all right.
You guys are really, really disrespectful, and it's not fair. You snickered the entire meeting every time somebody from the tennis community speaks. It's just not fair. And the data shows that it's mainly older players. I'm not saying that younger people can't, but if you look at the data, it's true. Okay? Thank you. You can disagree with anything, but data is data, sir. So, this is very high level. I think we can share the courts. It's a small community. Tennis is a very popular recreational sport, especially in Albany. I think that we mentioned the numbers, about 350 USTA members. That's people who are much more serious and actually are willing to pay to join an association. Most of the people that I see playing recreationally would never join the USTA. For them, it's just some way to run around the courts. And so I think that the numbers are very high. And I think that it goes back to the point where it's something that's very much used. Pickleball is not the highest need at Albany at this time. The cost is very high. I think that the numbers are probably going to be more like $100,000, $125,000 to do the retrofit, and I think there's a lot of higher priority things in Albany at this time. And there are other pressures on tennis courts which are going to make it harder to use them. It sounds like the basketball pressure has been changed, but there's also, over the next 5 years, kids who are going to be using the memorial courts for their recess, which I think is great. It's a shared use, but it does make it there are less tennis courts available. I don't really want to go through all of this. I've handed it out to you guys, and I'll share it with you later. I think that what I'd really like to do is I'd just like to emphasize what Morgan said. I think that there are ways that we can find things that work for everybody. And I think it would be really great to actually engage in dialogue with the tennis community and let's come up with solutions. I mean, if you look at where pickleball is played, it can be played everywhere. I can understand the desire to have dedicated ones, and Albany is a small place, and so in the ideal world, I would love it if we found a place to build pickleball courts somewhere else. I think in Albany, I think I think that there's clearly people who want that, and it would be great if we could actually accomplish that. But in the meantime, I think that it's really, really the wrong decision to take away tennis courts from a community that does use them and would really be impacted by that. And just one real quick thing, just answering your question about the number of emails. I looked at the emails since September, and of those 70, I'm sure that I made a mistake in not looking further back, but of the 75, there were 70 of them that were non-Albany residents. And then maybe if you look back further, there's more Albany residents. It sounds like there is a community in Albany residents, but based on the data that I've cited in here, that's where that came from.
Okay. I'm going to need to insist on quiet while the public is addressing the commission. It's very distracting to us, it's disrespectful to speakers, and it creates a climate that is not conducive to good decision-making. So please, while others are speaking, if you could remain quiet. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah, and I live in the neighborhood, and I've been playing tennis there for 10 years. And I know that if you go to Oceanview courts on a Wednesday, or Thursday, or Friday during the day, there's not going to be anybody playing there. It's just the tennis players or they're weekend players. They're, you know, I wish I would be able to play there at night, but the lights are bad. I tried to do that for like a month with a friend, and we weren't having good matches. I just couldn't see. What I wanted to say is I just hope you guys look at the whole area in a holistic way. Oceanview School is being rebuilt. I just heard that on the weekends it's going to be locked up. So our kids are not going to have that flat top area. Which kind of is a little bit related because as the area as a whole, the whole play dynamic is just going to change a little bit. During the weekends, it's a very active park. There's kids, there's playing, you know, obviously there's kids, there's birthday parties, there's soccer, there's baseball, and there's pickleball players, and there's tennis players too. And I think it's great that the pickleball players play there. It's nice to see the courts being shared. But if there's going to be like 8 courts, it's going to be very busy with pickleball. They're going to have like, you guys are going to come and be there often. And I just want to make sure that you guys think about like the parking and, you know, how it's going to change the dynamic of like the area as a whole. So, you know, we're a small town. We don't have a lot of space. We got to share. And thank you.
Okay. Molly Mitchell, Carl Chang, and Charles Hampton.
Good evening. I'm Molly Mitchell. I think I take the prize for living in Albany the longest. I've been here 42 years. And I just wanted to say pickleball was first called to my attention by the Albany Park and Rec with bells many, many years ago. It wasn't going on in Berkeley very much, wasn't going on so much in El Cerrito. So Albany was really at the forefront, but they haven't followed up with really making good facilities for us. And so I'll just address a couple of points because somebody said something about pickleball players don't need lights or whatever. We would love to have lights that work. I'm sure many of us would play at night if the lights worked at Memorial Park. I also would like something that works for everybody, so I'm in favor of converting one tennis court and leaving one tennis court. I go to Terrace Park. I live right near Terrace Park, so I go there very frequently. Those courts, it is true, tennis players are more weekend players, so they are kind of busy on the weekends. Other times, they're not busy at all. So I don't know if maybe it would be possible to paint lines on the courts at Terrace, not to take anything away from this plan, but I think a lot of pickleball players are more available during the day than tennis players are, perhaps. But those courts are often empty. And I think that's really all. I just hope we can work out something because Albany is a great community and we all want to work together. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carl Chang. I've lived in Albany for 23 years, and I I play a lot of tennis at all the Albany courts, and I just feel, well, I would hate losing 2 of our 8 tennis courts. And I think Albany tennis is an important part of our community here. And we have we have a boys team and a high school, boys team and a girls team playing high school tennis. And they've actually done very well in the past 20 years. Actually, my daughter won the sectional tournament. That's the highest level you can get here in the Bay Area. And she won it a couple of times, and she ended up going to Dartmouth to play tennis. And there's her classmate, Andrew, won NCAAs a couple of times also, and ended up playing college tennis at Santa Clara University. And they all learned their tennis from the Albany courts. So I think, and then I think there's, I think there's a lot of pride that we get from our high school kids doing well in tennis, and that's why we must consider how that tennis is important to this community and not take it lightly. I'd like to know how many pickleball players here are from Albany.
Sir, if you could address the commission, please. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to see how get idea. I mean, I'm not against it, but I just want to make sure that it's Albany people who wants these courts, these pickleball courts. Because and so I don't know how I know it. Maybe it's a show of hands to see who here are from Albany. Guess not. But yeah, I think it's important that the people who want pickleball courts in Albany are Albany people. Because I think there's a lot of tennis players in Albany that would like to keep those courts. And then I'd like to ask them, are those 4 courts in Cedar Rose satisfying the needs at this point? I don't know the answer, and I guess it's not. Because there's I guess, I don't know the answer because, but, and then the other thing is that, are there other places that we can build pickleball courts in Albany? If that's, if that's Albany's responsibility to provide pickleball courts to the East Bay, are there other places we can get? And then one more question is, this Oceanview and maybe Marina doing retrofits, so they might be using some of the Memorial tennis courts for recess. So it seemed like bad timing to take away Oceanview courts at this time. Maybe we can hold on it until it's clear how the Memorial courts will get affected.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Charles Hampton. I'm an Albany resident since 2005, so 15 years. I'm an avid tennis player. I live near Terrace Park, so I play a lot at Terrace Park a few times a week, pretty much. And from time to time, those courts are pretty congested, especially on the weekends. And I notice really that there's a shortage of all kinds of ball courts, basketball courts, tennis courts. Obviously, pickleball has a strong following, and I'm happy to see that. We have a shortage of money in Albany. Money allocated for things like trimming trees. That's been something that I've noticed has been cut back upon in recent years, and certainly the schools need funding, and there's all kinds of cost related to upkeep in the parks. So I am concerned about Albany residents getting their fair due, voice in this matter, because I know that Albany pays for the upkeep of these grounds and these schools and these courts and parks in Albany. That's one thing. And also, I would just say that from my perspective, I get bounced off the courts a lot by other people who want to play, or I'm waiting and I have to go and look. And I definitely, because I live on Peralta actually, and I know that there are those pickleball courts right down the street. on Monterey, I think. And since those that went in, I actually played on that tennis court prior to that being converted. I've played there several times because I couldn't get a court in my neighborhood. And I guess my point is that I think there's a shortage of tennis courts. And obviously, since there's a strong motivation for pickleball courts, I think I would also advocate for prudence in terms of making a decision to shorten, to lessen the amount of available courts in terms of, conversion rather than perhaps looking at some new courts or something that's less utilized, perhaps right there on the cusp of Berkeley and Albany, right there next to where the new pickleball courts were already installed. That would be something that would make sense to me, because from what I see, and I drive that road all the time, those courts don't seem to be utilized that much. Anyway, I've said what I needed to say, and I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Philip Moss, Karen Moss, and Bill Pounding.
I don't envy you guys. Philip Moss, Molly Mitchell before, 44 years. My wife and I, 40 years. And so we have a long historic memory. My wife wanted me to mention that, yes, I actually played intercollegiate tennis and professional tennis until I blew out my arm in a qualifying tournament for a major event. But anyway, so I couldn't play anything for 25, 30 years. And then pickleball enters my life, and I go, hey, this is fantastic. I get to actually go out on the court again. The New York Times just put an article out on pickleball, and it said in the last few years, pickleball has grown by 650%. So there is a need and there is a want. The hard thing is we look at taking 2 courts away from Albany, and 2 courts we would like to have so we can have sanctioned tournaments. Tournament in San Diego recently, a sanctioned tournament, had 550 applicants. They had to stop the taking participants at $50 a person. Just think about how much money that would bring in for the city of Albany if we could have a tournament like that. And there's nothing on this side of the hills that have tournaments like that. So yes, we would like to have tournaments. The reason that tournaments, I don't believe sanctioned tournaments can play on mixed courts. They have to be dedicated courts. 6, yes, 8 would be nice, but we could live with 6. I have looked, I think it's interesting that tennis players think it's okay for Albany pickleball players to have to go to other communities to play, but, they don't want to leave. There are 24 courts, 24 public courts within a mile of Albany. We want 2 of them. 24, a mile. That's a walking distance. That's a 15-minute walk in either direction. So saying that, wow, we're taking all this away from these 8 courts and we're taking 2 of them, we have to look more global, just like pickleball players have to look more global and where they play around this community. And it's actually great for pickleball players to go to other communities to play because they meet new people. They make new friends. It's a social aspect of this game. I remember when I was playing tennis, I would have to go, in the mid-'70s, I would have to go to a tennis court and wait 3 hours to get on the court. So yes, I understand delays and I understand sitting around. And pickleball players just don't walk on the courts. We have to wait also, presently and probably in the future, because this sport is growing. I didn't know about this sport until a year ago, and I was shocked because of the number of people that are playing and how social this game is growing. Just one follow-up, one thing about priorities. Measure R and Measure M, I voted for them, I've paid for them. That's to go to maintaining and new spaces and maintaining existing spaces. It's not for putting in speed bumps or other things. This is for parks, and I think there's funds there. And I think the $40,000 came from Berkeley when they did Cedar Rose.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karen, and I'm also an Albany resident of close to 35 years. And I'm fairly new to pickleball. A colleague brought it to my attention, and it's really opened up amazing world. It is for everybody. It isn't just for older people, although because a lot of us used to play tennis and have bad shoulders and knees, it is a wonderful alternative to playing tennis. And I've played mostly on the painted tennis courts, and I just recently, like 2 weeks ago, had my first chance to play at the Cedar Rose courts, and it is not even, the experience is so different, you can't, unless you really play, you can't really appreciate it. So it's not equal to say that a tennis court that's painted is the same pickleball experience as dedicated courts. I'm really strongly in favor of the 2 courts being dedicated for pickleball, and for all the reasons that people have said, that how many people can be serviced and play and have fun on them, and there are other tennis options. I also think that for a tournament, that it probably wouldn't be very equal to have some people trying to compete on a painted court versus a dedicated court. Who would sign up for that kind of tournament? And the parallel I see is with the Albany pool. We remember that for many, many, many years, decades, that pool could not have a tournament. And it really affected the students in the school, and the clubs couldn't use the pool. And then suddenly, when the pools, not suddenly, but when the pools were redone, now when I pass by Memorial Park, I know when a tournament's going on because there's tents all over the place. And every one of those families are gonna be, they came from somewhere out of the area, and they're gonna be spending their money in Albany when they're done, somebody said for meals and such. So I think it's a real revenue boost to have the ability to do tournaments. And let's see, open space in Albany, a couple of people have mentioned maybe building somewhere else. Know the city pretty darn well. I can't imagine where that space would be. I mean, Memorial Park, maybe this down Key Route in the middle there. I mean, there really are no places. And just one little anecdote, a couple of weeks ago, I was at the El Cerrito courts, and a whole bunch of us were playing, and one of the courts did have a tennis players on, and they were so enthralled with what was going on that they got Bell to come and explain pickleball to them, and they were maybe converts. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bill Pounding, and I wanted to thank you for your patience and indulgence in listening to all of the pros and cons. Much appreciated. Thank you to the subcommittee. I'd like to make a couple comments about some of the things that came up in the report, but Kathy and Deborah and I have been in contact with people that developed the courts in Berkeley and Concord and Alameda, and I think there's not that much research that would actually need to be done by the city staff if they decide to develop pickleball courts. We don't think that the courts need resurfacing. The corners do slope down, and that's necessary for drainage. Pickleball courts would be 8 feet away from the back fence and 6 feet away from the side fence. And the courts that everybody loves so much at Cedar Rose have much more significant slope, even on the court surface, than anything that exists at Oceanview. As far as the dirt and debris, pickleball players have been using a broom to sweep it away when it was an issue. The light post that in your meeting with city staff, that was a legitimate concern, but the light posts are 2 feet away from the fence, allowing at least 4 feet between the lights and the sidelines of the pickleball courts. And in addition to that, the light posts would actually be pretty much in line with where the posts are for the pickleball courts. In Alameda, there are actually benches that sit where the posts are, that are a much bigger obstacle for playing, and it's not a problem there. The only ADA issue that I think is really of concern is the gate opening, and the gate opening is 36 inches, which I believe is the minimum allowable as far as ADA. If it needed to be enlarged, yes, the fence would need to be reconstructed. But standard pickleball courts are playable by people wanting to play in wheelchairs. It doesn't need to be a different court. And then finally, as far as the infrastructure, if there are tournaments held down there, the bathrooms are adequate. There is parking right at Oceanview, and there's parking on the street, you know, a few-minute walk away from the pickleball court. So I don't think that's an issue. And in any case, Kathy and I and Deborah would be happy to work with city staff if that's a resource you'd like. Thank you.
Jack Wolf, Neil Ramos, and Bob Burkhart. And then there's two more after that, Chip Wason and John Swindell.
Hello. I'd also like to thank the committee for taking the time to give us a hearing. Let me start out by saying I am a tennis coach. I'm affiliated with the Youth Tennis League, which is a group that teaches tennis to elementary school kids in Albany and El Cerrito, really all around the East Bay. It's run by a lady who actually lives in Texas. I teach kids at the Marin School, and we go to the terrace courts on Tuesday afternoons. I also teach a group of first through third graders at the Harding School in El Cerrito. I was a coach also for pickleball last fall at Madera School in El Cerrito. Now, that said, I want to be a powerful advocate for pickleball. I love tennis. I've played tennis. I teach tennis. But I play a lot of pickleball, and I want to feel pride in my community in Albany that in the East Bay, we'd be one of the communities that really takes its head out of the sand and sees that this is a tremendous uprising of not just seniors, but also kids that want to play. And kids pick up the game very quickly. I've seen that from teaching it directly to kids. I also see it when I play at Cedar Rose and see, 4 or 5 kids playing on a court by themselves, or I see a father and 3 kids or a mother and 3 kids. And so that's been unique to just see, wow, they pick it up. But also I've, had to work with kids, teaching them how to hold a tennis racket. You have 2 hands for the backhand. We have a special device called a Billie Jean King Eye that sets up a tennis ball that's stationary, so kids can learn to hit a stationary ball, because hitting a ball that bounces is kind of tough. Kids don't have that much trouble hitting a pickleball, because the racket is lighter, it's smaller, the ball responds to it. So it's very easy to learn pickleball, except for the scoring, which even adults have trouble with. But the other thing I want to emphasize, I've always loved mathematics, and I think mathematics of this argument really of the need for pickleball are something that hasn't been enough attention paid to. Jean mentioned it. There's so many more people play in an hour if you have 3 or 4 pickleball courts, because every 15 minutes it turns over, you have 4 people on a court. So it's just like you've got 100 people standing in line waiting to play on these courts, and then you've got 4 tennis players saying, well, we'd be losing our opportunity. Well, if you don't give us that opportunity, you're serving 4 people and disserving, 100 or so. And I think that's a really powerful argument. And I thank you again for giving me time to speak. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Neil Ramos. I'm a local resident, Albany resident.
not going to specify which neighborhood, but I rode my bike here, so it's easy for me to get over here to Oceanview. I didn't intend to speak, but there were a couple of items I wanted to try to put a finer point on. I think a number of them have been covered, so please excuse my reading off my device. I think the resurfacing is good for all, whether or not there's one court converted or repainting or whatnot. I think the surface is in disrepair at this point. I know somebody else's responsibility is part of this process to decide, where money should be allocated, but I like the surfacing, and the lights would make a beautiful experience for whoever gets to enjoy the courts, however much they get to enjoy them. I'm a longtime tennis player, started when I was 4, and I only started playing pickleball 10 years ago or so, or about 10 years ago when I moved to Albany. The Oceanview court here is the original locus of pickleball in this part of the world. Across the hill in Rossmore, pickleball had already started to gain hold. Bell went over there and learned from them, brought it back over. Actually, it wasn't Bell at the time, it was the woman who, Heather, went over there and learned from them, and then there was a succession of another person whose name I forget right now, and then Bell took over the spot. But there was I thought that was a nice point, that the sport's been endemic to this that location, Oceanview, for quite a long time. I would hate to lose a court being used. If I didn't play pickleball and I played tennis, I would be disappointed with a court being lost to that, or 2 courts. Pickleball can't be played anywhere. You need certain parameters. It's not completely transferable. The courts over at Cedar Rose were pretty bumpy. There was a lot of root damage, and tennis hadn't been played on them for a long, long time. So the resurfacing that's taken place hasn't really made them into an ideal location. I think people have been flocking there because there was a lot of groundswell of support from people around the various communities, El Cerrito, all the way to Oakland, to try to help pickleball expand and have more venues. So if we get this venue here, I'm sure we'll suddenly be playing here. Anyway, I hope you do something positive in the Oceanview area. Thanks.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is John Swindell. I have lived in Albany for over 20 years, and I like racket sports. I like tennis, racquetball, badminton, and I've discovered pickleball in 2014, and it's the city of Albany's fault. I started playing at Oceanview, and then I left the Oceanview community and started to play out in Walnut Creek, where they had dedicated courts. I played in Alameda, where they put in dedicated courts. I played in Foster City, where they put in dedicated courts. And I want to play in Albany. I've played, there's a big concern about Albany residents, who's in Albany. Well, everybody knows tennis players play any city where they can find a court to play on. And it's not unusual for pickleball players to play in many different communities. So I'm a local resident. I just want to play locally. When I travel, I play pickleball wherever I go. I've played with people here from Boston, from Southern California, from other countries. If I go to other countries, I play pickleball. So it's a great sport. Everybody can learn it. I play a lot with teenagers. They beat me up a lot because they can run. But it's a good sport. You guys should try it. And, the tennis players keep complaining about how they're going to lose a court. They've got 8, we've got 0. So I think it's about time that Albany gave pickleball a chance. Thank you.
Patrice Aim and Dylan Tams.
Okay, I lived in Albany for more than 40 years in spite of my accent. That's a fact. So I've been shocked recently to learn that a quarter of Albany Hill is going to be excavated for $4 million houses. And I am even more shocked tonight. I arrive here, there is this big crowd worrying about asphalted fields where pickleball, I never heard of it before tonight, and tennis, which I've heard of before, I've done some. So I looked in my smartphone, they said that to convert one into the other, you just have to lower a net. Okay, now Albany, the city of Albany, on its little flag there, has Albany Hill. Okay, Albany Hill is absolutely unique. It's the place in the Bay Area, one of the free places with the most monarch butterflies. And Albany Hill, in all these years, century ago, they wanted to develop it, they wanted to build a dam, they wanted to build a lake. It was stopped a century ago. And the city, in the meantime, bought only 3/4 of an acre on top of the hill, whereas the entire hill is like 50 acres, okay? So not even 2% of the hill. So now we're talking asphalt, and some people talked about a lot of money. In 2018, a measure was passed, Measure M, and Albany Hill was one of the reasons for the measure for open spaces, okay? We don't need an artificial world anymore. All the people do cruise ships, and they think they are doing nature and stuff like that. Now they are not going to do cruise ships so much anymore. They were in a completely artificial environment, and to my analysis, tennis and pickleball, to some extent, still feed nature deficit disorder. So a lot of young people in particular will be much better off going on Albany Hill and looking and learning about the endangered species than to tap on a ball. I have done tennis myself since the age of 3, okay, so I'm not innocent either. It's a game, but it's not something human beings need to do, which is to get to know nature. And the fact is, a lot of money in '96 and 2018 was raised for Albany Hill. And now some people are talking about spending $100-something thousand to convert some asphalt court for tennis into an asphalt court for pickleball. Whereas you can read on the cell phone, you just have to lower the net by 34 inches. So I'm totally baffled, and I think that people should recover, touch with reality. Reality is that nature is being destroyed, and we have a gem of nature here in Albany, which is here, too.
I started playing pickleball about a year ago, and it's been incredible for me ever since. I have gotten a chance to spend a lot of personal time with my dad and a little bit with my sibling too. It's really easy to learn sport, and now instead on the weekends, instead of sitting on the couch wondering what I should be doing, I am at the pickleball courts and having a great time getting to know new people, and it's just awesome all around. I notice one thing that happens is around 10 and 4 o'clock on the weekends and on Friday, there's an excess of pickleball players. We've got courts, and everyone's doing 2v2, so there's 16 people on the courts, and then there's 8 people waiting, and even if you're cycling out the losing team 2 people at a time, it's not enough. Each person has to wait for about 20 minutes before they get a chance to play for about 6 or 7 minutes. And I think it's really easy. It's a really easy to learn sport. It's growing exponentially. So for people who don't know what pickleball is, they probably soon will, because I had no idea that the sport existed 13 months ago, and now I love it. As some of the other people have said, it's just old people who play pickleball. I mean, I'm up here speaking, and I'm not 60 years old. And I think that there are a lot of people who play tennis, there are a lot of people who play ping pong, and pickleball's only been around for like 5 years, whereas tennis, I don't know the statistics, but it's been around for a whole lot more than pickleball. And I think that if we're going to find a new sport that's all-inclusive, then we need to look to pickleball for that. And also, as more people start to learn, as more people discover what it is, the courts will just become more clogged. So we need to continue making more space for pickleball, which is why we need to make sure that we have that room for the people who will be learning pickleball, or so that they have the opportunity to learn pickleball. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. So, thank you everyone for your. Sir, I think you've.
No.
I'll be quick.
Okay, yeah, if you've turned in a card and you haven't been called,
They called your name.
you may provide comment.
All right. Hi. Thanks for listening to us. I didn't intend to speak, so this is a little off the cuff, but bear with me. I'm primarily a tennis player. I have been for years. I play on USTA teams out of El Cerrito, but my wife and I share pickleball, and that's like really important, you know. So I kind of am on one court or the other a lot of the time. So I mean, this is anecdotal, okay, but I think I kind of have my pulse on sort of both communities, and I have never, ever had a problem finding a tennis court to play on in our area. Never, you know. And I don't know, I just think that the tennis players are being a little selfish here. I mean, you know, and I don't say this lightly because I use the Oceanview courts to practice on. The reason I do is because they're not really used, you know. And so if, you know, the loss of one or two courts is really not a big deal. I mean, you know, I can find tennis courts to play on all around the place, and you've heard this. And, you know, you've heard the arguments about how pickleball is growing and everything, and you know, that seems to be pretty true. So, I mean, you know, I'm just kind of making an argument for the greatest good for the greatest number. So, I mean, you know, I would really strongly recommend that you convert at least one of the Oceanview courts to permanent pickleball courts. Thank you.
Hi there, thanks for your time. My name's Chip Wasson, I'll be quick. I'm a born and bred tennis player, like I said last time I spoke here, but I've turned into a passionate pickleball tournament tennis player. It's affected my entire family from the top to the bottom. Dylan, you hit the nail on the head, buddy. I think I have a fundamental solution for you guys in terms of layout that might satisfy everyone. Pickleball has a lot of momentum, and I don't think you're going to resurface these as two brand new tennis courts. So if these were 4 dedicated courts with dedicated nets, and these 4 were dedicatedly painted with pickleball colors, then you could paint a tennis court line scheme over these pickleball courts and keep this tennis net
Here you go.
No, this is painted as a tennis court. You keep 4, so you have 8 dedicated pickleball courts. So when you have tournament situations, you can put down the nets. When you have overflow, you can put down the nets. If there aren't enough people playing pickleball and there's tennis players who want to play, boom, they jump onto their lines. That solves the situation. So, and I know that the pickleball players have put their money where their mouth is. We've been out there having fundraisers. We have momentum with the community. And I don't know, how much money is there ready to spend on this project? $10,000? So, I mean, that says a lot. So I think that scheme could really work and satisfy the tennis community too in terms of access for everyone.
All right, and so we will need to limit the speakers to one time tonight. So, sir, if you've already spoken tonight, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to accommodate you.
No, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. We're not going to.
Yes, you can. You can extend the rules for 1 minute and make points that have not been addressed. They're not duplicate points.
No, I'm sorry, sir. We just can't do that. Sir, you're out of order. I'm sorry. You're going to need to stop.
Do we have security that can help?
Okay. No, I'm sorry, sir. It's just not fair to others to. There's an established procedure for
There's a
how we.
decorum for the meeting.
Yeah. So.
You're welcome. You're welcome to email the commission. You can certainly email the commission.
So, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, thank you, everybody, for providing your comments tonight. We appreciate it. So I think we're going to take it back to the commission now for our discussion. Is there anybody who would like to?
I just have a question. So would converting the courts to pickleball mean you wouldn't be able to play tennis? I think that wasn't made clear, totally clear.
What was that?
If you, with the like say to the right, to the course to the right, is there no option to play tennis there? I mean, could you
can play
still?
tennis if you're able to dodge the nets.
Yeah, so.
No, but I just don't, that's why so there would be
he's
no.
being facetious.
Okay, no, it's a real question.
No, serious.
I'm serious.
The solid lines are permanent posts with nets on them.
So you can't take them down, is the
Well, I
question.
mean, you could take the net, but you can take the post.
Okay, the posts, got it.
Yeah. So we're going to discuss it now.
No, I just wanted to be really clear
So
about
we're going to
what that
discuss
means.
it now amongst
Public
ourselves.
comments is over, so
thank you
please
all.
let the commission discuss.
The dotted lines are removable nets, but the solid ones, they're hardware.
Okay.
They're installed.
Could I just ask for a little bit more, if we know the information about the accessibility issue? Because I didn't totally understand why we had to give up one court or make one court semi-permanent if the other courts have the same amount of space around them. Why do you have any more information you could help me have?
Mark did the research, and his explanation was that it requires wider area around the court, which is counted as part of the field of play. So I think somebody mentioned it, and I'm just going on memory. Like let's say you need 5 feet on the sides for just a regular, but for an accessible court, you need 8, for instance.
It was
you need 10 in back or 14. So that's the difference. Otherwise, the court is the same.
So just to clarify, so the one that has the dotted line, I'm just curious because the perimeter of all the other courts didn't change. You just basically have made it so that you can get onto that one court by rolling over because that net's not necessarily in the way. Is that what makes it accessible?
So this was just an off-the-cuff suggestion, possibly. Mark's initial suggestion was there would just be one court on that side, and that would be the accessible court. It would be right in the middle. But then we thought, well, maybe you could just make make one permanent and then make one temporary, and then if somebody comes who needs the accessible, they could then use it. But that was just off the cuff. I don't know if anybody.
And then also to answer your question, I would say that originally we thought we would need to, as a commission, sweat all the details like that, and how many feet the light posts were away, and what would need to happen with that, and how many feet around each court for ADA or not, and do we need ADA courts or not. And then after talking to the city and Mark in Public Works, it became clear that really what we can decide, or what we should decide, is what we recommend doing is just deciding how many courts to convert to pickleball use exclusively, and And then there would be another layer upon after that of working out the details. And we've heard some people who presented who said, actually, you don't need all that extra space, and actually, we don't need extra leveling, and actually, we don't need. So that would be a whole other thing that we don't have to worry about, but it would be figured out later on.
And my only other comment is about the facility usage and availability of things like restrooms. I go past Cedar Rose Park all the time, and to my knowledge, there's a very nasty one like restroom that doesn't have a door, but I don't really think they have strong facilities there. And I see copious numbers of people playing pickleball there, so I'm not sure that the restroom is really a facility issue that I'm as concerned about. I think the parking, I understand the concerns. I'm not over there at times when it's really full at capacity, but I understand from parents that pick up and drop off and things like that, that's an issue. In terms of restrooms, I don't think that that's necessarily such an issue. I may be wrong.
Do you have something?
I have a lot of comments, so you guys can always stop me. But first, I just wanted to take a second to recognize everybody who came today. I feel like the sports community here in Albany is really strong, especially paddle sports on both sides. I feel like there's a lot of passion, and I know that that's led to people, feeling really strongly one way or another, but that's why we're here. That's why we have this democracy, right, is to try and find a solution. And so I just wanted to thank you guys. This has been an enlightening experience for me. One of the things that has really come up a lot to me is this whole idea of sharing and inclusivity and the fact that we are a really small community, so finding solutions. And one of the things that I'm a little uncomfortable with tonight is that I feel like there are other options and there are other things that have been brought up. And so I'm still, even though we've addressed this a lot of times, not sure I wanted to make a decision. And I felt like there were so many neat ideas that people brought up, like, maybe adding Terrace Park, or I have a bunch of other ideas I won't go into, but I just thought, is there an opportunity for us, like we did with the dog subcommittee, to actually have like a meeting where people can present ideas and kind of share together to maybe build that common consensus? Because at this point, I don't feel like these communities have found that with each other. And so making a recommendation to council is something I am uncomfortable with, because I think it would leave people feeling left out. So that was like my main sense of what I've gathered from the comments tonight.
Thank you. I actually feel the same. I feel like there's not, I know that the subcommittee has done a lot of work, but I don't know that it feels like there's still a lot of tension. And, I do think that's what we're here for, is to hear that and to try to come to some resolution. I just wanted to add a couple things. This is actually research I did in response to some of the basketball issues that came up, because I relate to this idea of getting something taken away, because in my community, basketball was just suddenly taken away, and it was very striking and very upsetting, and there wasn't any kind of public process. So one thing I started researching was this idea of what do we want to do with parks in Albany, right? And so we have these little neighborhoods, and do we want to take recreation as a whole and say there's 8 tennis courts, therefore you can just take away 2, no big deal? Or do we want to kind of look at each park as this isolated sort of environment? And I think that there's a real need to do that here in Albany. We actually do walk a lot. And I just think my discomfort with sort of eliminating 2 courts is one of the things that we might recommend, is just that then tennis is just gone from that neighborhood. And that's actually a neighborhood where, it's not so easy to get around. Like, you can, at Memorial Park, you can get in Terrace Park. Yeah, you have to cross Marin, not great. But, from Oceanview to Memorial Park, where the tennis courts are, that's a full mile. I know that people with kids are not going to want their kids to be biking. Anyway, there's a lot of climate change issues. We're trying to make things more walkable. I just wanted to step back for a second and think, as a community, what do we want out of our parks? How do we want to maximize recreation? Not just looking at the whole of the Albany, but also the distance that people have to travel to get to the recreation amenities. So I just want to put that out there. But I would agree with Commissioner Sardinius and say I feel like there's more sort of discussion that needs to happen with the community.
Let me address that a little bit, kind of my take on it. We thought of this, and really what happened was we were going through the process you're looking at now. We need more information, and then we were just kind of hit with we hit this wall, which was we need staff to have some time to look and get some real information about it. We're talking about, well, the Cedar Rose courts are like this, and so we can fit more in there. No, we want standard pickleball courts. We want really high-quality courts. We don't want to spend all this time and money and come up with something substandard. So we need research to go into what that means, and we need research to look at how much that's going to cost. So we could decide 2 courts, or 8 courts or 4 courts, and then they go back and they say, well, we only have money for 3 courts. And so we didn't want to spin these wheels, go through all this process, and then have the practicalities of it that we could have found out ahead of time, just squash everything and make everybody unhappy. So that's why we decided to kind of do it in this order. Let's just kind of make a commitment that we're gonna look at doing 1 or 2. We intentionally left it vague because these are the practical issues are going to come into play. We figure, and probably what's going to come down to is weighing dollars. For this amount we can do this. For this amount we can do that. If we do this, we're going to have to give up this, and so it's going to come down to that sort of decision. But we can't get there until we've moved it on, taken the next step, so that staff can come up with those numbers for us. I think I'm being very confusing, but that's kind of my take on where we are right now. So I don't see this step. I see this step as just kind of moving on, just pushing it to the next step. The next step.
I would agree with that, and I feel like we've heard a lot of information, but there's still information that we need to make an educated and just decision. So, and in order to do that, I think there does need to be staff level input on that. So recommending 1 court, 2 courts, I don't think we're quite there yet.
So my question to Isabel is there any other way beyond making this kind of recommendation that, say, we did want to move forward with 1 or 2 courts, that City Council could direct staff to gather this information?
That's what would happen, is if your recommendation would go to council, and then council would provide direction to staff one way or the other.
But so is there a way where if we didn't want to say we want to pick an option now, that City Council could still direct staff to find out more information that could help us make some kind of recommendation?
So what would your recommendation be?
Like, in other words, we want to explore this possibility of potentially converting this. Could we get City Council's approval for further research from staff?
Yes, thank you.
Right, and you could certainly ask for that, but I think there would have to be a commitment from council to want to move forward in one way or the other.
Yeah, and part of the concern there for me is that this has been before us for over a year now, I think. I don't know how many, 3 or 4 public meetings we've had with it, which we've had a lot of great input from people who've been present, people who've emailed us, been out to meet people on the courts. We've had a lot of education and input, and my concern would be is if we just said, okay, City Council, you figure it out without much, I think they would feel like they don't know what's going on either, and they would have a ramp up. And so I think it's much better if we can make as clear a direction as possible for them to then work with, something that, based on what we've already learned from, that they can then run with city staff to work out the details. That would be my recommendation.
One thing I want to say, though, about, not engaging with the tennis is I know that those back courts in Memorial are not well used, those back tennis courts in Memorial, and that I've heard that there's some requests for them to be resurfaced at some point. I don't know what this sort of lifetime sort of expiration date is for courts. But my concern would, if we went down this road, as Mark Crowley thinks we might need to resurface, then we're resurfacing a generally good court when there's like another tennis court that desperately needs to be resurfaced. So I would just be concerned about not looking holistically too at that. And I don't know if this process might lead to that. Those are some of the questions I would have, because
right, and then what I would say is that what we learned is that the tennis courts at Memorial, I don't know how long ago they were resurfaced, but they were resurfaced, but that the decisions that went into how to resurface them, and I don't know who was involved with those decisions, ended up doing certain kind of layering of something that made it not as responsive as people were used to. So there's just different materials in those courts, and so that would be a whole other discussion as to, does the city want to rip out courts that maybe were resurfaced recently, but people don't like that job, the particular materials that were used. So I think that's a whole nother, I did see that concern mentioned in the emails, but I think that's a separate issue. And what I did want to mention, I did want to respond also to you mentioned, look, well, maybe we should just consider restriping more public courts like at Terrace and all that kind of thing. And that could be something that we want to do, is paint all the courts double for pickleball. But that, of course, what that also means is we need lock boxes everywhere. It also means only the people who have the combinations can use them. And that's mostly people in the meetup groups and the email lists who are in the know. And that would still mean that kids, youth, and people that just want to do a pickup game can't do it. So it excludes a whole bunch of people still if you don't have permanent pickleball courts.
So something that I've been thinking about as I've just been hearing all these comments is how challenging it is to set up like the separate nets. And so one of the things I was wondering is, you know, we have great recreation staff. This is probably asking way too much, but, you know, is there a way where there can be like pickleball days or tennis days at different courts where people can like actually go and set up nets and have them pre-set up, right? And then take them down other days, just so that, like, because I'm just thinking, like, if you really want a multi-use environment, what's the best way to do it? Is it always to have something permanent, or is it for us to make some sort of like commitment to having people set up the courts, right? Like, so that for times where people don't have access to the lockbox or don't have the ability to set up the nets. I'm just trying to think, like, how can we move outside the box and think of other solutions that can help achieve the needs of both communities, right?
So I'm going to say a few things. So first, I'd like to thank everybody in the public who took the time to come tonight to speak, and who took the time to provide written comments to the commission. I personally found those comments to be very beneficial, very educational, and were very helpful for me. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for the subcommittee for taking the time to put together your report and to stick your necks out to make a recommendation that is not something that everybody supports. So thank you for doing that. What I'm hearing tonight, I think, myself included, is feeling like there's not yet enough information to make a specific recommendation about the Oceanview court conversion question, 1 or 2 courts. And I think a big part of that is information that we still need from staff in order for us and for the city council and for the community overall to make an informed decision about cost and feasibility questions. I think there's probably discomfort with taking a specific position without knowing some of these details, including costs and feasibility. And in order for us to get that information, we need the city council to authorize staff to dedicate time to provide us and the community with that information. I think there's a majority on the commission who's feeling that way. I'm also sensitive to the feeling like that we've been talking about this for a really long time and we're not making a decision about it. People are coming to these meetings, spending a lot of time, writing us letters, and I think they expect and deserve the city to make a decision on this issue. So I would like us to maybe be able to make a recommendation to the council about the desire for a dedicated pickleball court in Albany. I think that that's my personal position. I've heard from the public, including a lot of Albany residents, that there is a lot of interest in this activity in Albany, and there is a strong need for quality pickleball facilities. And that if the Park and Recreation Department in Albany is serving the needs of its residents, that this is an amenity that should be provided. And I think I'm in a position to say to the city council that I would like to see a dedicated pickleball facility in Albany. And that I would like them to direct staff to provide the commission with the resources that we need in order to make the best decision about where that facility is and the specifics of how many courts and what the layout would be. So what I might recommend is that we take the step of, if the commission agrees with this, of telling the council we support a dedicated pickleball facility in Albany, and then providing us with the staff resources we need in order to make a specific decision about where that is and what it would look like.
Actually, if I may, I have a question for Isabel. So pickleball at Oceanview is on our work plan. So why is that not adequate for staff to devote some resources into research?
Well, because you're making a recommendation to the council to convert pickleball courts.
And so,
Yes.
so us having the information we need in order to fulfill our work plan isn't enough of a reason for you to spend some time, for Mark to spend, I don't know, some time.
Well, you've heard, you were there.
No, I know.
Yes, so it's a lot of work. So before, your recommendation is whether or not to convert pickleball,
Sure,
Oceanview into pickleball court. So if you move that to council, then council will provide direction on, to staff supporting your recommendation or not. And at that
modifying,
point,
yeah.
yes, so that's what we need to find out. That's what you need to find out, whether or not they support your recommendation, if it is to convert Oceanview into pickleball courts.
Right. Okay. So that extra step. I mean, it's the work plan says, it doesn't say consider. It says convert. If I remember.
Right, but I think there's the language is a little too strong.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm just wondering.
Or
Yeah,
what
I don't remember how that was added.
what is intended.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, very good. So.
Yeah.
So you see it as, in order for another step to happen, we need to say, we recommend converting Oceanview, or creating.
You need to bring a recommendation to
dedicated pickleball
council
court
that
of some kind.
That includes the consideration of yes, converting pickleball court. Yes, you know what I mean.
I understand.
And then at that time, again, it will be the council's decision as to how they move that recommendation along.
Okay, all right. And it may come back, it may not come back to us.
Exactly, that's what I was going to say. It could come back to the commission, it may not.
Yeah.
It just depends on the council's deliberation and what they decide is the next step.
Odds are good.
I can't say.
But I think what's so difficult for us is, I'm sorry, did you want to?
I just didn't understand what was just said. What might come back and what might not come back? If the council agrees to direct staff resources, we would not maybe see a result of those plans and research, or were you indicating that they might say, no, we don't want to support that?
Exactly. So it all depends on the recommendation, the direction that council provides. If there is movement to move forward with further research on the conversion of the courts, that information could come back to the commission.
And can you share from your experience, to what extent does the availability of funds to actually fund this conversion play into the city council's recommendations? Because that's another piece of this that I feel very in a dark room about is, do we actually have the money to move this forward after so many months of discussion, and or what pot of fund is this coming from, so that we start to understand the scale of the cost with that?
We don't know until, staff does further research and figures out the cost. And at that point, if and when the project is approved for construction, then that's when the financial piece comes together. And that's a different step in itself. Then it's trying to piece the funding piece together depending on the cost. So if there is, it could be 40,000, could be 100,000. It just depends. So in order for this project to move forward in one way or the other, there needs to be a recommendation from the commission
And we've been
that goes to council.
We've heard a lot of input, and it's all been good and very helpful for over a year. And is there a deadline for capital improvement projects to get those into the city for acting on those sooner than later?
I'm not aware of any deadline.
Some people had mentioned, I thought Mark had March.
Is updated periodically, and but if it is approved by council, they would, get into the CIP depending on the threshold. But my guess is that it would meet that threshold, so it would be included in the CIP.
And then another point I wanted to make is that some people were concerned about with Oceanview being closed and the blacktop being closed and fewer play surfaces available for kids, that permanent pickleball would actually be a bonus for kids that wanted to play in that area. They could just walk over and play by themselves, even if the blacktop at Oceanview was closed. So that I thought that was a potential benefit to that neighborhood. And then also I learned a lot about how many people in Albany have been trained, and that dozens more are being trained every month, and that even kids are being trained. And so those were all some things that were new for me. I heard a number of people that were excited about pickleball who said they'd be excited about one court being dedicated to pickleball and the other court being shared with tennis. And I hear people on the commission being concerned about people, being able to walk to local resources. Of course, right now, there's no dedicated pickleball that anybody in Albany can walk to. So if we make dedicated pickleball courts at Oceanview, then there would be something that University Village kids could walk to. People in my neighborhood near Albany Hill could walk to, and there would also be a tennis court available for people to walk to for that, with an option for even more courts when people want to coordinate that. So that seems like something that meets a lot of the needs that people on the commission and people in the audience were voicing, and so that's why I would be in favor of a one-court conversion.
So is there a reason is there a reason that you didn't recommend either the one court or the two court conversion? Was there a difference of opinion?
No, I think that's when we start getting into the particulars of the court. If we say we want to convert one court to 4 pickleball courts, and then they do this, that, or the other, it's, well, we only have room for 2. Well, then does that mean we want, there was too much variation, too many variables there for us to really make a strong recommendation without staff being able to put some time into it. I mean, the accessibility comes into it, the surface comes into it, a lot of different factors played into that. I mean, we talked about it, but it just, it seemed premature.
I just am going to try making a motion, and I'm going to see how that goes.
Braver than I am.
I'm going to make a motion that the commission expressed support for permanent pickleball or for pickleball facilities in Albany, and ask the city council to direct staff to conduct the research and details that we need in order to be able to make a more specific recommendation about the where and the how and the why of that.
So now we discuss, is that?
I think we need a second first, and then we can discuss.
I'll second.
So I think what's different for us, this isn't something that this commission deals with very often. We've got to make a decision that some people aren't going to be happy with. And I think that's what's really hard about this. And I understand your comment, your motion. That's actually what I came up with this afternoon. Well, it's kind of a fallback. It's kind of a way to give everybody something. But I'm not sure that's what we really need right now. I think we might need to be a little stronger, one way or the other. I mean, this is for the commission to decide, but that's, I just want to put that out there, that we're doing something that's going to be hard no matter what we do.
And I'll just clarify, I don't have a problem supporting it as it was originally recommended, but I do understand the concern that we actually, I think continually, we've asked about resource questions. We still don't have an answer about how much money is even in the pot that's earmarked for this group to help direct. Every time that we ask that, we're told we don't know, or that money has already been used. So I'm also extra sensitive to the idea that people have put this much time in, and we're gonna get to a point in the road and be able to say, it all sounds great, and we have no money to fund it. So I kind of feel like seeing a plan that actually lays out and takes into consideration all of these accessibility issues and the space issues and what it would actually be like and what it would actually cost seems like a pretty basic level of information to have as we make a decision and recommendation. So to me, I don't mean it to be a weaker worded thing. I'm in support of having some facilities for pickleball here. I feel like there's enough need and it meets enough people's needs in the community. I'm not, that's not against tennis. I play both sports. I just feel like I'm convinced that there's a need for something, but I also feel like we can't do our jobs without the information that is actually specific and allows us to understand feasibility and cost.
Go ahead. I have a question about what your motion is. So I think what you said is that support, letting the council know that we support permanent pickleball in Albany, which is different from saying we support the conversion of 1 or 2 courts at the Oceanview. Was that distinction intentional?
It was.
Yeah, and what I would say is I would be concerned that we've spent over a year discussing Oceanview. Memorial is off the table. No one's ever going to convert that because that would, as far as I know, would terminate the high school tournaments there for Albany and St. Mary's. So, I mean, maybe the commission would want to do that, though. Maybe I shouldn't say it's off the table, but we could vote to convert, Memorial Park, but that's never been on our agenda, and it's not in our work plan. So to say, okay, now we want to investigate other tennis courts, I think we need to really ask first, should we have a change in our work plan? Is that something you think we would need, Isabel? Because the work plan says investigate or to convert pickleball courts at Oceanview. Mm-hmm. Would we need a change in our work plan to consider Memorial and Terrace?
No, there's something that comes to my mind when the commission is asking about considering other parks and what services are we providing in all of our parks, and are we, you want to make sure that you're providing equal opportunities for all the different sports. And, the commission will be working on an update to the parks master plan, within the next 6 months or so. So that's a good time. That would be a good time to look at that more holistically. But as far as your work plan for today and what you're recommending, I think you do have to stick to the Oceanview, or you can make it broader and do say, like, Commissioner Patterson said, that you do support permanent pickleball courts in Albany, possibly at Oceanview, but you either want to wait for the master plan process to see where that could be as you evaluate the park usage throughout the city, or like it's been said, to direct staff to do the research for pickleball at Oceanview. I mean, there's, I think there's different, but if you're looking at a more holistic approach and a more, more comprehensive approach, then I would strongly suggest that you put that into a master plan process.
I mean, the reason I think that, even though it may seem like a push off in a long time, we've seen these projects, these small projects that we've said yes to, they're not started yet. So I don't know that in terms of this group we're talking to right now, I don't even think this would delay anything. I mean, we don't have money right now, and it's been difficult to find ways to push any project forward, even a small little dog park bench. So I guess I just want to say it's not like if we did wait till the master planning process when they look at the city as a whole, I don't think it would delay anything personally, from my understanding of how these projects have gone.
My understanding from talking to Mark at that meeting with Mark and Isabel was that the funding, that whatever we approve and the city directs staff to do, that the funding considerations would then come into there, and it would just be based on priorities. So I think it's not our situation to worry about the funding. Also, Mark's sense of it, what he was telling Todd and me and Isabel and Belle, was that if the court needs to be resurfaced, and that's something that could be discussed and people figure out if we decide to move forward with this now, that whatever configuration of courts we would have wouldn't cost that much different than if we did one court or two courts. So I don't think, and if it doesn't need to be resurfaced, then it really is pretty minimal cost, and then again, it wouldn't cost that much different to do one versus two if you're going to repaint everything. So I think it's not upon us to worry about the cost. No one here is proposing anything that's, outrageously expensive. So I think we shouldn't get bogged down with that. I also don't think we should kick the can down the road and by saying, oh, let's open it up to any tennis court. What that really is saying is let's also consider terrace, because like I said, that we can't put permanent pickleballs in courts in Memorial without killing the two different high school programs, actually, St. Mary's, which plays tournaments, and Albany High, as far as I know. And all of our meetings have been about Oceanview. Our work plan's about Oceanview. Everyone who's come here, no one from the terrace area has come and said, oh, please don't put it in terrace, because it's not on our agenda. So I think we've heard a lot. We've gotten a lot of input. As Todd has said, no one's going to be 100% happy with whatever we do. Even if we say we're not going to ever do anything different than what's there right now, that still means that this vibrant pickleball community, people are getting trained all the time, that it's just probably just going to die out in Albany, basically. So what I think, I agree with Commissioner Abbott, that if we have something that takes the input that we've gotten, that has local, allows people to walk, for example, converts one court, if we can commit to that, then that would allow people to walk to their, for tennis and for pickleball, and would still allow pickleball a lot of flexibility with temporary nets when they needed that.
So we have a motion with a second on the floor.
Can I make just one quick comment about funding? Just real quick, this is a distinction that came to me as we were talking about. This is different than a lot of the funding discussions we've had in the past, where we've had a pool of money, we've tried to do something. That's not where we are now. Now we have something that once it's approved, they will have to go find the money. So it's kind of a different thing. So how much, what are we going to lose if we do this? Is kind of a different story. That's just the point I wanted to make.
So to restate the motion is for the Commission to make a recommendation to the City Council in support for permanent pickleball facilities in Albany, and to dedicate staff resources to provide the Commission and the community with the information it needs to make a decision on where those facilities would be and the specific configuration of those facilities. Is that an accurate description of your?
Yes, that was yeah.
Okay. So, all in favor? Two. Okay, so the motion fails.
Okay,
would somebody like to make an alternative motion?
I'll make a motion to request the City Council move forward with a plan to convert one tennis court at Oceanview to permanent pickleball, and to allocate staff time accordingly to come back to us with details of different options and for that plan.
second?
I'll second that one, sure.
So
Is there any discussion?
can I ask just a question? Does that mean that it would be this plan where there's 4 temporary courts as well? Or it's just to at least explore 1 permanent court and not think about whether or not there would be?
Right. So the main thing, the big decision is take away 1 tennis court or not.
Gotcha.
And so, but yes, it would also be, maybe we should add to, add to that the, what do you call it, temporary pickleball courts on the other one. 4 temporary pickleball, if we need that much detail, that would be the recommendation, would be multiple temporary pickleball courts on the other tennis court.
So what you're saying is one dedicated pickleball and then 1 shared pickleball tennis?
Yes.
That you want both of those in the motion, because I may have to rescind my second. I'm serious, because I think it's different to say we want to recommend the conversion of 1 tennis court to 4 permanent pickleball courts, and then we'd like to ask for the staff resources to explore the feasibility and configurations of this and other possibilities. I feel comfortable seconding that. I don't feel comfortable seconding that for sure it will look like this on the other half, because I don't feel like I feel like that's the feasibility information I don't have yet from the plan and the sort of
That seems
design.
fair.
That's a requested amendment.
Yeah, so how would you phrase that?
The commission recommends the conversion of 1 tennis court to a permanent pickleball court, and exploring and dedicating staff time to explore feasibility, configuration, and other possibilities for this project so that we can make an informed decision and recommendation.
I think we could add to that, just looking at researching how that shared configuration would work, and researching not just 1 option, but potential multiple options for how that sharing would be possible.
Do we have
I'll still second that.
Okay. I'm sorry.
I'll second.
So I think, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So we had a motion, and you requested an amendment to the motion, and did you accept the amendment?
I accept the amendment.
Okay, so now we can have any more discussion if we want to subject ourselves to that. I do want to say a few things about this. I personally think it's very important within the West Albany neighborhood to maximize the diversity of facilities that are available to residents within walking distance. And we have heard over the last year that there is a lot of interest in tennis, and we have heard that there is a lot of interest in pickleball as well, and there's a desire for high-quality facilities for both of those activities. And I think because of that, I can support a motion if it includes the statement that we support retaining 1 tennis court at Oceanview for that reason. And I would want to make it clear, if the commission agrees, make it clear to the council that that is part of our recommendation, that we want to see 1 tennis court remain at Oceanview. So if that is part of the recommendation, that is something that I can support.
I thought it kind of went without saying, but if that's another addendum, I guess. So how would you phrase that?
Yeah, I think that I'm seeing some nodding heads here, and so I think that what the motion is that the commission recommends the conversion of 1 of the tennis courts at Oceanview Park to 2 dedicated pickleball courts, while retaining
Four, yeah.
Four dedicated.
That'd be inefficient.
Yeah, pickleball. I'm sorry, sir. So I'm sorry, sir. The commission needs to be able to conduct its business without interruption, and if you're not able to abide by the procedures, you're going to have to leave.
All right, well, then make it fair. If they get to speak up and you get to respond to their comments, then you should not be discriminatory.
Okay. So we'll formulate the motion and take an action on it.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So convert one of the tennis courts to 4 pickleball courts, and to retain one of the tennis courts, and then to allocate staff resources to support the commission and the community to decide the details of that configuration, including possibly enhancements to the tennis courts and
Including the lighting, that also came up.
I was going to say, do we want to include the lighting? Because that's a pretty important piece.
Yeah.
I second that.
Or
Whose motion is it now?
amend it.
All right. So all in favor?
Okay, what's next on the agenda?
Motion passes. So thank you, everybody, for your attendance and participation. We greatly appreciate it. So the next item on the agenda is 6.3.
Now to the difficult item.
Sugar Sweetened Beverage Tax Commission recommendation. So is there a staff report on this item?
Yes, there is. So as you know, the sorry. So in November 2016, Albany voters approved Measure 01, a tax on sugar-sweetened beverages. Per the ordinance language, the council shall hold a study session annually to receive input and recommendations regarding the expenditure of proceeds from the tax, and solicit recommendations from a number of organizations, including the city's Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission, and other commissions as well as in the Albany Unified School District, and individuals with specialized expertise in areas of public health and programs related to diabetes, obesity, and sugary drink consumption. The Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission prepared a SSB recommendation for the council study session on April 1st, 2019, and it is attached to the staff report for your information. The council did approve a fiscal year 2020 sugar-sweetened beverage tax expenditure plan, which is also attached to the staff report. And I can go into details of it if you'd like to. Now it's time for the fiscal year 2021 work session, and this will occur on April 20th, 2020. So now the role of the commission is to come up with a new recommendation for council's for the council workshop.
Any questions of staff?
I have a question about the recommendation we received via email about bicycle racks on the school property as a part of this sugar-sweetened beverage. Just to clarify, because that's on school property, typically would that need to go through the school district, and members of the school district or representatives of the school district would need to come to this session and advocate for that? Or is that an appropriate thing for us to be exploring?
Well, I mean, typically, the council, doesn't necessarily use public funds to provide amenities on other agencies' property. So it would probably, you could certainly make that recommendation, but I'm not sure where it would go. Certainly, if there is interest by the community to see that happen, they can go to the school district, and if the school district decides that they want to put that in their recommendation to the city, because they usually do provide a recommendation to the city, they can certainly do that. There's no rule here as far as who should be making a recommendation in favor of.
I think I was just concerned that perhaps those two individuals should be redirected to the school district, and if in fact that's the more appropriate agency or body to be able to speak to that or answer it, so that they're not thinking that they've asked us and that we would have the purview to do that.
Sure. And we were going to find out also from the school district if bike racks are coming. If this is a second, they've done their
basketball net sort of
renovation, and if the bike racks are coming. So we just have not heard yet from the school district if it's in the plans.
And I appreciate that question, because that email also got me thinking that bike racks could be a great way to spend the money to get encourage people to use alternative transportation and healthier lifestyles. I did notice that in the list of things that are already being funded, one of them is an Albany school program for a healthy music and movement program. So it looks like some of the city tax money is being spent in Albany schools, if I'm reading that right. And so it could potentially, so I think it might still be within our purview to put it on the list of things for the city to consider.
Sorry, which one to put on the list?
Bike racks on school district property.
My take on that is there's a lot of money out there for bike racks. I'm not sure that's what we want to be spending these funds on. Strollers and Rollers is always looking for a place to put bike racks. I know that if they applied to the Albany Community Foundation, there's a good chance they'd get money for bike racks. I think that there's resources there. And I don't know, it's just for this on school property. And I know that we don't like, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. You just talked to Amy from Albany Strollers and Rollers, and she said, yeah, there's funding out there for bike racks. So
I think that's great, and if we could just maybe send a message to these individuals and just let them know, hey, there are other avenues to do this, and because I just think that they're great ideas that came from the community. We just may not be the right body to be directing them towards.
Well, the Traffic and Safety Commission is going to be making a recommendation as well, and I think some of that correspondence was actually from members of that commission, so they're going to be on top of that.
Could be, yeah.
I have a question for staff. So I think I read in the staff report that the city's anticipating $250,000 available for the next fiscal year.
Yes.
Which is less than previous years. Was that?
But we always estimate. It's always an estimate. But the council did choose to adopt an expenditure plan that was beyond the $250,000 that we had estimated last year.
I see.
But there is a fund balance that we were able to use to make that difference, but the recommendations from our finance director for next fiscal year is $250,000. And the other thing I want to mention is that you also have you have this meeting, and you also have the March meeting. For that item to continue that discussion, and I'm not sure how you've done it in the past, but if you can certainly also dedicate a subcommittee to do research and come back at the March meeting with some suggestions, or you feel free, you can also discuss this as an entire commission tonight and think about it and then come back with, but you'd have to come up with a pretty, a determination of your recommendation at the March meeting, because after that there won't be enough time.
I have had, I think I shared this with you previously, but feedback from members of the public. I went to a session that was organized by Spur, which is a group that does a lot of different kind of programs, but they had San Francisco, Berkeley, and Oakland, who all have passed a similar ordinance, on a panel there talking about their sugar-sweetened beverage tax, how they use it, the different ways they apply it, their thoughtful approach to evaluating the success of their programs, and each city's handling it differently. They're by a multiplier of at least 10 have a lot more resource to direct than we do. But it was very informative and interesting, and one of the things that I've also heard as feedback is that we do have public health professionals living in this community. I'd love to see us make an effort for outreach before the March meetings to encourage some of those informed members of the community to come and share their thoughts and ideas about some ways that we might want to approach this in a way that's strategic and also sort of driven towards the outcomes that this is designed to affect. So that's just one thought, is if there's some kind of community outreach we could do, announcing the meeting in a way that maybe is beyond just putting up the agenda, which we do every month, but maybe up on a bulletin board or something, because it would be, I have seen at the workshop at the city council, some of those people attending, and by that point, it's already kind of late because the recommendations have been in writing and they've already been submitted, and so there's not as much time at that point for people to make informed contributions to what the recommendations are. So it seems like maybe at the commission meeting is a better time to invite some of those people to participate. That's one comment. The second comment I wanted to make is about some of the ones we did this year. I did attend one of the free cooking classes to get a feeling for that. And there was a lot of things about it that was positive. I also had some thoughts about some parts about it that maybe could function a little better. And I just was curious how we go about deciding who's actually going to get the contract to do that work. So I love having the classes, but in terms of how we pick the person who's teaching the classes or how we pick or identify, I know that probably happens on the staff side, but I think that's an area around which I was curious, having had the experience of attending the class.
I think that we use existing contract instructors who were already providing cooking classes and cooking camps for kids. And we gave them the opportunity to provide those classes at a base rate instead of having to be paid, a percentage of the registration that we usually receive. And to the comment about reaching out to healthcare professionals, we do that for the council workshop. We send out letters to dentists and healthcare professionals in the community to either come to the meeting, the work session, or write, to the council before the meeting. So that's part of our outreach for the work session, the council.
One question I had was looking at the last year's budget. There's two things from Parks and Rec: the nutrition, cooking classes that were just mentioned, and also physical fitness classes all that was free. And it seems like potentially a great use of the money. Is that something that you would propose through us to approve if you wanted to, if the Parks and Rec wanted to continue with that?
Yes, because it does fall under your purview. So just to give you a little bit of feedback I think the cooking and nutrition classes have been very well received, mostly full. There was some issues with the classes being free and people canceling at the last minute and trying. So we would work, we've tweaked that process over time to make it so that we have a good wait list, and we're looking at other options should the classes continue. And then the free physical fitness classes in the parks weren't as popular. I think part of the reason was that they were, they're free, and then they're also at different times, at different locations, so it was hard for the community to know and really get the information to be able to say, oh, okay, I'll go to this fitness class at this time, and it's not happening the next weekend, or because it all depends on the availability of the instructors. So right now, I think we have the gentle yoga class that is ongoing on Sundays, and that's probably the most popular class that we have at the parks that is open to everyone. And the dance parties also at the parks were popular as well. Mm-hmm.
One other comment just about the water bottle filling stations. I use them all the time, and I think that is such a great use of these funds because it's the direct counterpoint to what we're trying to combat. I love the one that got installed here. I love to read that the senior center is going to get one and that they're looking for places on the Albany Greenway. It seems like that covers a lot of the spots in Albany because we've already put it into some of the other public buildings. But I definitely support whatever infrastructure we can put in place to help people choose a healthier option. So,
a question I have on that is there the sense that there's a continued need to fund more of those stations?
I think at this point, after the ones on the Albany Greenway are installed, and we're still scouting out the best locations based on the water availability, any other locations would require a lot of infrastructure, a lot of changes. So Yeah, we're probably almost done with as far as one-time, for one-time expenses for the bottle fillers, because we'll have them at all of our facilities along the Albany Greenway.
One to think about is if we do end up changing that entrance to the dog park, is there an adequate water source there?
There is, at the snack shop.
There is a water filling station too?
Yeah.
There's a water filling station by the new women's restroom also. It's not right by the entrance, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
I had a comment about, we observed that the funding's less. By design, this should get less every year. It should be going away.
That's one of the
right? I mean,
goals.
that is the goal.
Yes.
That's why I'm a little uncomfortable funding programs. I like the idea of funding capital, funding changes, because the program is going to end. Because we're going to run out of money. Whereas if we take the money we have now and put in water filling stations, well, that's going to last
however many
a
years.
while. So I much prefer doing something like that than physical fitness classes that may not be as well attended or for whatever reason. So anyways, that's just my...
Yeah, I agree. I was wondering, how much can we put to actual, capital expenditures for recreation to improve, even just improve the existing recreation, like the LED lights of the tennis courts, whatever can
In Oakland, they're using all their funds to basically do the maintenance they have underfunded over many years. It's not a safe long-term solution, but I can say that at least in that community, they are using their funds almost totally to just pay for work they should have been doing in their parks.
Because I think it's clear that the community wants it, needs it, would use it more than even some of these classes. So why not fund something like you say that's permanent, that could increase physical fitness, I'm thinking. So
that relates to a question I have. I looked at the ordinance trying to find the language that describes the eligible expenditures, and I couldn't find anything. So what are the rules on what this money can be used for?
Well, it's a general tax. So there are no rules.
So the reason for that is if you earmark it, it needs 2/3 to pass.
Yes.
If it's not earmarked, it just needs a majority. So it passed with simple majority. So there is no restriction on what we can spend it on.
But there is an interest in, focusing the expenditures to promote healthy
There's no legal
behavior.
requirement. The city could use the money for whatever it wants.
Maybe there's no legal requirement, which I wasn't aware of, but I'm glad you asked that. But also, there might be a political cost, maybe if people use it for things that are completely not related to fitness or well-being or health or for when voters go to the ballot the next time to vote.
Exactly. No, there is a commitment to use the funding for, to increase healthy behaviors or towards, the increasing the health of youth and the population.
So the money
but
could
it's
be used
not,
to construct recreational facilities in the city of Albany.
That's what it sounds like.
It could be used for anything.
I'd be
it
for
could
that.
be used for anything.
I mean, I've been pushing for a public restroom. I think it should be used for constructing a public restroom on the Greenway.
And we did pitch that last year, and I was told that there are other bodies that are looking at that same issue, and so I think that may be why they didn't sort of approve it within this, because they were interested in it with social and economic justice and some of the other groups. I'm not sure whether that's moved forward or what's happened with it, but it's certainly on our list from last year.
I like the idea of having it back, though.
So I'm looking at the clock and I'm seeing it's almost 10, and I'm wondering if there's a desire for us to make a recommendation on this item tonight and be done with it, or to continue the discussion to our next meeting.
I think we should have it as an agenda item at the next meeting. This just gives people some food for thought and will allow us to organize our thoughts and also hopefully have members of the public that maybe have some expertise to join that discussion. That's my personal feeling.
Sorry, Commissioner
Can I
Patterson.
make my suggestions now, or should I wait till?
Yeah, that'll be help us.
I just have three.
Be good.
One, last year we had said to relocate the community garden, but it sounds at Oceanview, but maybe some funds could go towards reorganizing the community garden to help them optimize sunlight, or maybe offer more classes. They already do that through the Master Gardener program. Another is in our climate adaptation and action plan, whatever the acronym is. There's there's a desire to bring a farmer's market to Albany. I think that is a really great idea, and if there's some way that the sugar sweetened beverage tax can help facilitate that process, then I would highly support that. The final thing, which might be a little bit trickier to implement, but I would love to see more CSAs in Albany and maybe some way to support families, like I don't know if it would be a subsidy or some sort of like drop or something, but some way to get folks more able to get fresh produce delivered to them. So those were my 3 ideas.
And I'll just mention mine, but I'll bring them up next time too, which is I'm very focused on equity and access of sort of exposure to recreation and sports. So I think they were on there from last year too, but opportunities to learn to swim and or opportunities to learn to ride a bicycle, and perhaps in partnership with other community nonprofits or something that have an interest in the same, I think makes equitable access in a community where not everyone maybe has a parent that can teach them those things or access to facilities. So I'm interested mostly in looking at equity and also children, because I think this was really designed to reduce type 2 diabetes and obesity in children and to create sort of healthy behaviors at an early stage of life.
I would add that knowing that it's possible that the water bottle filling stations, like the low-hanging fruit is kind of almost done, that if the city were going to spend more money on that, to maybe look at a capital expenditure to put in some new plumbing further afield, like at the beach. And so that would be to actually run some water out there on one, maybe spend all the money on that if there's no water pipes nearby, and get that done with. And then also, I think we should think about if it is available for play fields, how would we, what do we have that's ready to go for that? What would we recommend it's spent on? Do we need to have something really specific like lights at Oceanview, tennis, or for example, the mountain biking park, $90,000 for water filling stations. That would basically pay for the mountain bike park as far as the estimates that I remember hearing. So that be actually a question for Isabel. Do we need to have specific projects that we'd want it spent on like that?
I think so.
Only if we want them to happen.
Okay.
Because yeah.
All right. So, great.
Okay, any other comments on this item?
I would say, I would put in a word for the LED lights, the tennis courts, I think at Oceanview. It seems like that could happen now, regardless of what we do there. I have a question. What was that, was it a talk that you went to?
It was a lunchtime brown bag session that was facilitated by SPUR, which is an urban research and planning group, and it was probably about, it was right before Shelley left, because I connected the person from Berkeley with her because they were interested in water bottle filling stations as well. So, yeah.
You don't have any like handout on that or anything?
I had a brochure from the city of Berkeley, which they would be glad to provide, which is about, they do a grant-making initiative, so they do their disbursement. A lot of it goes through community grants to other organizations, so they've kind of taken that approach of, let's hear what the community wants. San Francisco has a whole other scale of things, and they have a very structured program. Both Berkeley and San Francisco do thorough evaluation of the outcomes that come out of this as well, and have plans after 5 years and after 10 years to do sort of a full look-back evaluation, which I thought was really robust and encouraging. And I would say that Oakland is in a very different financial position, and so they're using the funds to sort of fill a gap in their budget.
Thanks.
We have gaps too, so that's there's always a
it happens to the best of us.
Okay, so I think with that, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is future agenda items. An opportunity for commissioners to request future agenda items.
So I've requested this last month, and I will request it again, and I sent emails about it. But I do think that something related to Albany Hills should come before the commission. I know that there has not been a formal plan submitted, but then again, people have also come to our commission saying that they thought that Albany Hill was a park, and I was at the Planning and Zoning Commission with Commissioner Martin, and I heard them say that they are a reactive commission. I believe that we are a proactive commission, so I would like to see at least an update from staff on, the city's efforts to purchase the hill in the past, something around like Measure M, and just what the options are there related to that. There's been talk of like repealing, I can't remember, was it Measure K? But
That was something
anyway,
we
I
learned
feel like
about
there's just a lot of information that we could use, even if we aren't making a decision, just an informational session for us on the status of that parcel on Albany Hill. Sorry, that was very long-winded.
I would like to see information about that parcel. It was eye-opening to me to see that the city had passed something in the 90s saying they wanted lower density on that parcel. But of course, what that meant for the developer was, I want to build way up the hill so I can build more units. And so then some of the commissioners on planning and zoning were saying, well, maybe we should try to get the citizens to repeal that measure. So I think just getting up to speed, like you're saying, even if it's just informational, would be good.
I'm not even sure that wouldn't be good, just not for this commission, but all bodies having to have a session that they could just come and learn about it.
That'd be great.
Because I'm not sure. I'm sure we're not the only ones who are interested.
So what's going to be really important is that we make it clear that that agenda item is not about a specific development project.
Yes.
There's no application, at least now, that's been filed with the city, and we're just going to be learning about and talking about the city regulations related to open space that apply to that property, as well as additional opportunities to preserve open space on that property. And so there will be no discussion whatsoever about that application that even.
I have concern that as an agenda item, we will hear very specifically from the public comments that are specific to that application, despite the fact that we aren't structuring it that way. So I sort of, I guess, for staff, suggest.
Well, can't it be like a staff presentation? Don't we have presentations where there's not a lot of comment? Like, we've had that from Margot on Albany Hill.
Do we not allow public comment on those staff presentations?
No, you do have to have public comment.
I mean, people are going to comment.
It's fine. I'm not trying to shut down the comment, but I just.
Talk about the project, but we'll make it very clear that this is not a discussion of that project. And once they've said their piece, we'll limit our conversation to other subjects.
Also, I mean, it should be made clear that we're not planning and zoning, right? So we wouldn't even have the purview of.
And we're not taking action. We're just.
not taking action.
Let's point that out.
I mean, the city might be concerned in putting resources into this since we really have no say. I mean, this body doesn't really come into play here. We're interested and we want to know about it. And so that's why I like more of an idea of some sort of just informational session for whoever.
That's a good idea.
Well, but part of the deal could be, there's properties to the north of it where the land was set aside as private open space, and so it can't be developed on according to how the deeds were set up or whatever. And so I would hope that as our purview is open space and parks, that some of that would come before us as to how much of the land is decided to be in what kind of arrangement, I would hope. But I should say I have actually asked city staff about how many meetings and how, will it come before parks. And there's some concern that a new state law may impact this that is aiming to aid development by limiting the number of public forums. So that would potentially mean that it would go before very few of the commissions. But the city staff, we're still trying to get more guidance on that.
I just have concern that even this discussion kind of goes beyond the scope of agenda items. So I feel like we need to sort of pause on this and just say it's been identified, leave it for Isabel to sort of think about how to bring that back. And then, because I just want to be mindful of the public interest in this topic. And
So I have another item. Oh, sorry. But it might need to be a work plan amendment. So if we get into work plans, but when I gave my Be Curious talk, I mentioned that Albany could become a Be Better city, and Mayor Pilch was there and said that that is something that could be taken up by the Park and Rec Commission. And so I'd like to either figure out how to formally add that to our work agenda if other commissioners are amenable to that, or see that at a future meeting. And I can present on what Bee City USA is and what that process would look like.
Can I just ask for one, sorry, I know you have a lot of agenda items. This is not something, I just wanted, if you could next time talk a little bit about the planning, the master, Parks master plan,
Sure.
and just the timeline, that kind of thing, just a quick update for us. Okay, thanks.
Also, the, I lost it.
Okay. Well, our next meeting is March 12th. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Nice
Yes,
job.
first one.